Thank you for joining us on our journey here to preserve the history of mixed martial arts. When I wanted to take on this project, I needed help. I brought in one of my favorite matchmakers, Miguel Iturrate, and the MMA detective, Mike Davis. So to do this, we've been able to preserve history. Welcome and enjoy. Welcome back, fans. Thank you so much for paying attention. Very excited about tonight. We have a fantastic guest. This guy fought from the beginning. I feel like he was one of old school guys like myself. I remember having him on some of the same cards as me and always thinking, this could be a problem for trying to get that bonus money. But, not only has this guy been a fantastic fighter for many years, does commentary. And the thing I realized, just the guys who do the commentary, they really understand the sport on all facets. And you can really tell the knowledge. This gentleman actually has it very well. Jossh Thomson, how you doing, brother? Good to have you on.
I'm doing good, my man. Thanks for reaching out, man. Glad we were able to link up and catch up a little bit, man.
Sure. Now, go ahead and real quick, tell everybody what you got going on and how to get a hold of you and all that type of good stuff, because, man, you're fascinating what you have going on, and you do a great job working with Bellator and whatnot.
Yeah, right now I'm working with Bellator as their analyst at the desk. I was doing the cage side commentary and stuff. Then we made the switch to Showtime, and then they took me from the cage side commentary with Big John McCarthy and some of the guys down there, and they moved me back up to the desk to kind of hold the fort down there. So who knows? I might be going back and forth hopefully here soon, but it should be fun. And I enjoy that. And then I also do a podcast with Big John McCarthy called Weighing In, and we're getting a little bit of traction. We're stirring the pot a little bit, but we're trying to talk as many facts as we possibly can. And, we have fun, man. That's the one thing, I don't think when they first tuned in, they're like, this is probably kind of a little bit of an odd couple, right? Like you got Big John, who's been around since UFC 1, but really didn't rep for UFC 2. And then myself, I've been around since UFC 40. I got signed UFC 35 and actually fight until UFC 44. But, we've been around the business, man. He reffed my first fight, and he reffed my very last fight I ever did. So he didn't ref my very first fight. He reffed my very first fight at the UFC, but he reffed my very last fight in Bellator. So, it was just like one of those nostalgia things. We started working together, and we started talking, and we found ourselves just being the two nerds at the bar, just like, sure, everyone else is there hanging out after the fight, right? But it's him and I talking the fights until 2 a.m., like a little bit off to the corner. Everyone keeps coming in, trying to talk to us about it, and like they walk away because they're tired of talking about fights. And John and I are still there till the bar closes, talking about fights. And we're like, you know what? So I finally just said, hey, I know you have a podcast a long time ago, and Dana White asked him to shut it down. This was back in the day, and he had about 100,000 subscribers at the time. Ooh. And Dana asked him to shut it down, so he shut it down. I mean, he would have probably had 500,000, 600,000, 700,000 subscribers had he just kept doing it, but he didn't. There was really no money at the time, I think, and so then I asked him, I said, hey, do you want to start one up? I said, with you and I work together. So it's like I do the cage, or you do the cage, and I do the desk, and we love to talk fights. And he's like, you know what? Let me think on it. For about a day went by. He's like, you know what? Yeah, let's do it. Let's get it started.
Jossh, let me ask you, is it like all kinds of conversation, or is it Bellator oriented?
Everything.
No. We talk combat sport. We talk boxing also. So we'll talk only the high level boxing. We'll talk Canelo. We just talked the Anthony Joshua and Usyk fight. We talk all levels, but it's got to be. We talk PFL. We talk one championship. One's a little harder to talk because John's fucking almost 60 years old, which he's not. Actually, no, he is. He actually is almost 60 years old. I say he's almost 80 years old every time I make fun of him. Then I realize he is almost 60 years old. But it's hard for us to stay up until 3 a.m. to watch the fights.
Yeah.
So we got to watch it on the next day, and then sometimes it's like
too late.
It's too late. We've got to film that night, and it's just like okay. And we're trying to cram in all the other events.
What really works about your podcast with John is you have strong opinions. It sometimes rubs people wrong, but what you're saying is factually true, and it creates a lot of conversation. It's a really good balance. It really is. It's a fantastic show. It's one of my favorite podcasts.
That's the problem. I think because we don't work for the UFC, people think like we're shields for Bellator. They think that I'm like, look, one of the biggest things that I always try to remind people of is that I had a conversation with Scott Coker prior to us starting this thing. And I said, look, we got to be able to say whatever it is we're saying. If we don't like that fight, we don't like that fight. You know what I mean? And I, we try to minimize that because before the fight, so it doesn't hurt the marketing of the fight, for Bellator. But what we have to take into consideration is that when a fight we don't like, those fights can sometimes end up being the best fights. And so you got to be careful how you say it. Like, this fight doesn't do anything for me. Yeah, guess what? Sometimes I've seen some UFC cards and some Bellator cards where I'm like, fuck, I really don't know any of these guys. Like, I have to do research on them. And then when I actually look at it, when I actually watch the fights, it ended up being some of the best fights ever. Like a bunch of finishes, a bunch of knockdown, drag out fights. So you got to reserve your judgment previously before the fight, but then after you can go ahead and talk about how you want. And that was one of my conversations with Coker, as I said, hey, like, if we're gonna do this, I got to be able to have free reign to say whatever. I can't have you calling me going, hey, what the fuck? Like, why'd you say this? Why'd you say that? And here's the thing is I already know that, and because I have friends that do podcasts, and like Dana makes out a couple calls like, hey, what are you doing? Like, you can't say that about this person, or let's keep this to the minimum. You can't have people butting into my shit, and it's like, we have a good product. People listen to us because we do try to be as unbiased as possible. People always believe we are because we work for Bellator. But the reality is, if anyone's biased, I'm mainly biased because I'm biased to the people that I train with. I've trained forever with, DC and I was, with DC, with John Fitch, with Khabib, with Islam Makhachev. It's like those guys, of course I'm going to be biased to them, man. They're fucking some of my best friends. Like some of the people I've trained with the longest. And so you ride or die with your boys. And, I'm going to say whatever the hell I want to say about them. And when I explain to everybody, I'm a fucking homer, man. When it comes to my boys, expect me to be a homer. Okay, that's who I am. If you don't like it, fuck, you can just fast forward through this shit right now, okay? Because that's who I am. That's really what it comes down to.
Do you ever have it where you're talking about people like in their fight, you're critiquing them, and later on they start hitting you up and explaining themselves? I've had that many times. Like, here's what was going on. I'm like, dude, hey, you don't have to explain yourself to me. I'm just letting you know what I see. Don't come back at me like, this is why I did this. I don't care. I'm just telling you what I saw. I think this is wrong or right or whatever. Don't try explaining justify your actions. You ever get anybody doing that to you, trying to like hit you up afterwards?
Yeah. Usually they will try to justify what happened. What they'll try to say is they'll justify why the fight didn't go their way or why something happened in terms of, I was dealing with an injury before camp. I wasn't able to run. My cardio was this. And look, and that's some of it's probably true.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to it, I've actually had a lot of fighters that I've posted clips of me talking about their fight. And I've actually had a lot of fighters. Sean O'Malley was one of them. Kai Kamaka was one of them. I posted a clip about what they needed to do and said, hey, they got to do this or this. And both of them commented like, you're absolutely right. You're like, I was starting to read my own paper clippings or yeah, you're right. I got to pull the trigger. I have all the talent, all the ability in the world. I just didn't do it. I didn't get it done. When fighters can recognize that, there's a future for them. When they just start taking the critiques if they can't own up to what their responsibility is. Now, look, the other thing as well is I'm not in the cage. And you know as well as I do, Chris, is that when you get in the cage, whatever your corners tell you to do, but you feel it out there. You know what's going on, and unfortunately, we felt the hardest parts of this sport. And so when that happens, you're like, look, you weren't out there. You don't know what I was feeling. Like maybe the speed was more of a factor than we realized. You just didn't know it until you were in there. And those type of things, maybe the punching power was more than we thought. It just didn't seem like it was affecting you. You should have went through it. There's all these questions that it can be debatable. But at the end of the day, it's just you and that other person in the cage. Doesn't matter what your corners tell you. Doesn't matter what I tell you. Doesn't matter what anyone else says afterwards. Okay, you still got to go out there and get it done. And the bottom line is for those fighters that I've critiqued, they didn't get it done. And so, and when they come back, and I like the ones that can just say, hey, you know what, you're right. Or, hey, that's not the reason why, but you're right in terms of I do need to work on these things, some of these things as well. And those are the fighters that you can see that will have a future in the sport.
For sure.
I don't want to stir the pot up too much, but like I'm reading between the lines here. So you're telling me back when John McCarthy did his podcast that Dana White would call him up and say, shut that down or don't talk bad about John.
No. Dana White actually made him get rid of the podcast. He told him, hey, if you want to ref, like not so much if you want to ref, but hey, I need you to shut this down. You've made some comments on there. It's getting a lot of attention. And I need you to shut it down. And so it was shut down. So
Dan, was he an employee of theirs, or they were hiring him?
Well, it was a ref. It was a ref. And you got to remember, like, you can actually petition to not have that ref work your shows.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, and you know,
So,
and
yeah.
the influence that John was living in Vegas, I believe, at the time, and the influence that Dana has, you know, with the commission, it just allowed for that to happen. So
yeah, bottom line is he shut it down.
But that's it.
yeah.
Okay. So real quick, Josh, what I like to do at the beginning, I like to find out people's background. What got you involved with the sport of fighting? Were you a wrestler? How did this all come about? And when did you get involved?
You know, I got involved. I started training in the end of 95. I started training jiu-jitsu. Yes, yeah. I started training jiu-jitsu at the end of 95, a little bit of Muay Thai, same gym, like same location. I was living in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho at the time and going to high school there. And I was born and raised in San Jose in California. But then when my parents split up, I went to go live with my dad. My dad moved up there to be closer to his parents. They were getting older and just they retired up there. So he loved it. My dad was more of a mountain man, you know, loved hunting, loved fishing, the lakes, the mountains, all that shit. So he loved all that. So, you know, my mom and I weren't getting along at the time. You know, I was younger. So I was like 12 years old and I just like, hey. So we bounced out, man. I went to go live with my dad. And from then on, I was wrestling. I was wrestling in California as well. I was playing soccer competitively on traveling teams. And, you know, I loved wrestling. I loved soccer. And when I moved up to Coeur d'Alene, they have spring and fall ball for soccer. And then wrestling took up my whole winter. So my life was pretty filled with just sports. Like those were the sports. I threw in occasionally like, you know, some baseball in there, but I wasn't very committed to it. I mean, I was doing all right with it. And I actually liked it. I just knew that my passions were wrestling and soccer, which, you know, I've had several interviews as of lately and talking about how the two of those sports together, they really make you an athlete. Because for fighters, right, especially for the guys above 170, it's the cardio. Mm-hmm. And what's the number one thing fighters don't want to do? I don't want to go do the cardio. I don't want to go run. You know, like they neglect that more so than they'd rather go hit mitts and they'd rather go spar. And they'd rather go grapple than go run sprints or go. Well, guess what? Soccer, all it is fucking running. And so when you're doing that, like there was never a moment where I was like, yeah, I'm not going to run today because I fucking loved running. Like if you're going to play soccer, you better love running. You better learn to love running. And you know, and so I played like left and right wing, and I played forward, you know, and so striker. It's just a ton of running, a lot of sprinting, and you know, and then long runs up the side when I was playing the wing. So I loved to run. And then wrestling, you know, I was wrestling in Idaho at the time at the high school there, and we had like an 80-yard hallway that we used to run. It was like, you know, probably I'd say about 80 yards. Yeah, we had to run it down and back. Yeah, so it was probably, I'd say, you know, between 60 to 80 yards long. So we had to run our sprints in the hallways, you know, after practice. And so that's how we did our cardio, man. Like it was a lot of sprinting for wrestling, and we just kind of moved on with that. So I think the two sports itself really groomed me into when I started training jiu-jitsu, because I had the wrestling background, and the Muay Thai was, you know, just the repetitive kicking the bag, like running, sprinting, all that stuff. So, and I love to kick. And so soccer and Muay Thai kind of work together. And I'd say, you know, I trained probably about, I don't know, a little over a year and a half, you know, wasn't even a blue belt yet, had my first fight, you know, and just grew from there, man. I've had a bunch of fights, like my first year in college, I had a bunch of fights. I was fighting like every other weekend for $150, $300, you know. Wow. Sometimes, you know, my very first fight ever, I paid $25 to fight, you know, so
the good old days.
Yeah.
Now, is all your fights on your record? Because I know a lot of mine are not. Back in the early days, I probably got 15 that aren't on there.
Yeah.
You know? So is you the same way?
Yeah, I'm the same exact way, because what happens is, you know, they need to see video footage, and back then the camcorder situation and cell phones with cameras, none of that shit was around. And you know, at the time, I was, you know, generally fighters didn't have a lot of money. And so when we were fighting, you know, at that age, I was fighting, trying to make $150 so I could, you know, have a little bit more money to go do what I wanted. And, you know, I didn't have a camcorder, so no one ever filmed my fights. And, you know, and the event was always in, you know, like you said, in fairgrounds with like, say 150 people or 200 people. And, you know, no one there had a camcorder trying to film it. The event itself, they tried to film it. You never got the video footage because they had to send a VHS tape, you know, and that never worked out. So it really just came down to just, you know, like you never got the footage. But yeah, I would say it's funny you said 14 to 15 fights, because I think it's around the same ways. I had about 12 to 13 fights somewhere in there that aren't on my record.
Let me ask you, obviously you trained at the highest level with the top, DC and that team and stuff, but you mentioned Coeur d'Alene. Is that the first time you ran into another guy who would be a pro? Was Trevor Prangley there already? Because I know he lives there now.
Trevor and I were best friends, man. Trevor and I wrestled together at North Idaho College. When I walked into the jiu-jitsu gym, we were wrestlers together, but he was a heavier guy, so we really didn't hang out a whole lot. We just saw each other in passing, saw him at some parties at the college. And then I walked into the jiu-jitsu gym, and he was there. It was during the summer. I'm like, oh, shit, what are you doing here? He's like, I've been training jiu-jitsu, man. This guy here said he, teach some jiu-jitsu, and I, whatever, and it was something to do on the off season. And we're like, okay, cool. So we just started training, man, started having more fun, and we got to know each other, and we developed a good group of people. And, Trevor's been one of my best friends ever since, man, since I would say like 97. Him and I've been two of the best friends. 97, 98 was a little rough. Like we weren't that close. But then as we started training together more in 90, 98, 99, that type of situation, we grew together. We started traveling together and going to fight at different locations. Like, you gotta remember, I was trying to explain to people back then, like, Chris, were you fighting back then?
Oh, I started in 98.
98. Okay, so back then, right, we didn't have, the internet was around, but it was like dial-up. And so what you would do, people would just call the gyms. They would find out what gyms were in the areas that, like, say, so I live in Coeur d'Alene. So they'd call the gyms in Montana. They call the gyms in Seattle and Washington. They call the gyms in Oregon and all around in Idaho. And then everyone say, hey, this week in Boise, everyone's going to be here. We're going to match you up, come in, weigh in. Okay. And we'll match you guys up. Winner gets $300. So you didn't know who you were fighting, where they were from. You couldn't do research on it because there was no stats. There was no MMA websites at the time, really. It was like, I think the very first MMA website I ever looked up was Sherdog. I think it was the very first one I ever looked up. There was probably one before that. I can't remember what. But anyways, yeah, it was like there was no MMA websites. And so you didn't know what you were getting, man. I showed up sometimes and fought guys that were 3-time All-Americans in wrestling, at Boise State. And like they didn't have any fights. I mean, like I beat the shit out of them, but it was like one of those, they were quick fights. They had no stand up. They didn't know what to expect. They thought they were just going to double leg me and take me down and, that type of situation. But you would just show up not realizing who you were fighting. Like, oh yeah, you're who, you didn't know anything about it. You couldn't just get online and look them up real quick because there was no internet at the fucking fairgrounds in the shithole place you were fighting. So you would really just show up, weigh in. They say, hey, you're 160. I remember there was a time I fought a guy that I had seen Trevor fight about 2 months before. Then we all showed up again at the same venue, and he was 200 pounds. And I saw Trevor smashed him. And I was like, all right, well, I have some good goes with Trevor. So I weighed in, and they had no one my weight. And they said, do you want to fight or not? It's $300. I was like, yeah, fuck it. I want to fight that guy, though. And they said, okay. They asked that guy if he wanted to fight me. And the guy's like, yeah, sure, I'll fight him. He's how small he is. I was only 168, 170 at the time. He was like 202, 201, somewhere around there. And it was a tough fight, but I was able to get the win over it. But it was good. Like those are the type of situations that people don't, they forget, or just the newer fans just don't even realize. They just think the sport just all of a sudden turned up on ESPN, and now we're all stars.
That's what I love about these type of things we do, because I mean, there's just so many different stories. Yeah, you never knew who you were going. Especially if you weighed about 135 pounds. I felt so bad for those guys. They always fought 155 pounders. I mean, they never fought guys their own weight because they weren't there. And it's just like, you want to fight? And they'd be like, yeah, I guess. I mean, I'm here. I mean, I guess looking back, it didn't go on the record because there wasn't any record.
Yeah, right.
They were just fighting tough all the time. I felt bad for the little guys with us, and they just take a pounding. And I know many times I fought guys who weighed over 200 and I weighed 170. Just like, you could headbutt. There was every place you went, there was different rules. You'd go there. What are the rules here? No strikes on the ground. No this. I mean, you just never knew until you got there. It was just a different world. But
but on top of it, though, then when you got in the fight, the rules didn't exist. Yeah. There was a lot of times where, like, okay, the rules are,
you headbutt, like, you look up what?
Yeah, like no elbowing on the ground. All of a sudden, you're elbowing I was elbowing the kid on the ground, and then he's like, "Hey, no elbowing." And the ref's like, "Keep going."
You got to look at it too. Like half the time I'd go there, and after I'd fight, like I might be the ref. You know what I mean? So I remember taking over for the ref once because the guy was like a karate guy. and he didn't know about the ground. Like people were tapping out, and he's just standing up there, and like let the guy get hurt, and I jump in there afterwards, like, oh, you take a break, I'll take over, because like the dude didn't even understand what was going on. I had to take over just so people didn't get hurt.
Yeah. So Chris coined that era, the bring your own gloves era too.
Yeah.
So I can give an example of one of Josh's fights where like the level of experience was definitely lopsided against him. And it's actually your first record on fight. Your first fight on record, January 19th, 1999, which obviously is probably not your real first fight, but you fought at the Idaho Summer Fight Series against Brandon Shuey, the big dog. So Brandon at the time was he had more experience than anybody else in the state of Idaho. Yeah. And that's your first fight. And he's on a Team Hardcore. Do you recall that?
Oh, yeah. I remember that for sure. Because we had went down to Boise for some other fights, and we had weighed in, and no one was there my weight. And so I didn't fight. Like, there wasn't anybody close. And I didn't know, like I said, a bunch of people just showed up. They had the fight. But I went down, and we had some friends that were fighting. One of my buddies, Jeremy, had fought this other guy named Todd Booth, I believe is what his name was. Todd something. Anyways, good kickboxing fight. The two of them just threw down. Absolutely amazing fight. But yeah, that fight was definitely one of the fight. That was one of those fights where the rules went out the door. It was supposed to be open palm strikes, and then it turned into real punches within 20 seconds. It was like, oh, you're gonna throw a real punch? Okay, I'm gonna throw a real punch. And so there was no open palms at all, and then it went from there to just heavy ground and pound. And that was one of those fights where I knew he was good on the ground. I wasn't too concerned about his jiu-jitsu because I knew I was going to be a little bit bigger. I was a tiny bit bigger than him, and I knew I was a lot stronger than him. He was a small guy, like in terms of like muscle wise, he was a small guy, but he's super flexible, and he loved to attack heel hooks. And so I knew that. And so all I had to do is just stay away from him. He was, I think he trained originally, I think, with Lowell
Team
Anderson.
Hardcore. It was
Team Hardcore. But I think Lowell Anderson was there during that time. It was kind of like he trained with Lowell Anderson. Lowell fought John Lewis in UFC 23 or 25 or something like that. Anyways, and it was during that era. And so he was into the heel hooks and all the other stuff, getting into it. And I just knew I had to stay away from his legs because I had seen him fight a couple months before that, probably about 6 months before that. And they called me up and said, hey, I want this fight. I'm like, yeah, sure, how much? And then it was so funny because they actually told me, they're like, hey, I only fought him for $150. Yeah.
Good payday back then. Good payday.
The craziest part was that the guy that was kind of coaching me, trying to kind of get me fights, kind of like my manager coach that owned the gym that we were all at. He thought I was asking for too much money. I was
125. They'll say.
I was like, what are you fucking saying, man? Like, and then after I went out there, I finished him within like 2.5 minutes, something like that, 3 minutes, something like that. And after that fight, they called me back like a week later, said, hey, we're gonna have another show, and we want you to fight again. And they're like, it's gonna be like in 3 weeks. And I was unscathed. I was like, yeah, sure. But I was like, I'm not fighting for any less than 300. So I doubled it up. I was like, no way, I'm not fighting for any less than 300. And then I said, you pay for all expenses. You pay for 2 coaches to come down because they didn't want to pay for any of my coaches the first time. I was like, no, you got to pay for one. It was like this big mess, man. Like I was like, what do you guys? So anyways, that was the second time I fought for that same promotion. I fought this guy named Karl Zamora, who's a 2-time All-American for Boise State. And it was like it was like a 7 or 10 second knockout with a head kick. Boom, slide him through the ropes. And he was a wrestler. He was a good wrestler. I knew he was a good wrestler. I'd kind of heard about him only because I was a wrestler myself, and I was wrestling in North Idaho, and I kind of had heard of it. He had him and his brother were both good wrestlers. He was one of the Zamora brothers. And so kind of word got around. I remember him wrestling at the Tri-State tournament in Oregon. Yeah, I was there a bunch of times. I think he was a senior when I was like a sophomore or something like that, and he was up. So it just.
Was he a runner-up?
What's that?
He was a runner-up, wasn't he, for state?
For state or for Tri-State or for?
I thought he was the runner-up for wrestling for the state.
For Oregon, I don't know about for where he was from. I just know in Boise, when he wrestled at Boise State, he was 2 or 3 time. I think he was a 2-time All-American for Boise State.
Wow.
And so
real quick, are you still wrestling at this time, or you graduated already?
No, I'm still wrestling. I'm actually younger than him, so I'm still wrestling. So
Okay.
during wrestling season, I wasn't really I wasn't allowed to really compete because I was there like I didn't want to get hurt. So you know what I mean? So we weren't really training a whole lot. We really weren't training a whole lot. I was just wrestling a lot, grinding away in the room, and then we got done. As soon as we got done with wrestling in March, we were done, man. We were like, okay, let's go straight to the gym, start training jiu-jitsu, I started playing soccer, and then jiu-jitsu was kind of rotated and just stayed busy and active, you know?
And the wrestling team was cool with you fighting? Did they know about it, or they care, or they think it was good? Or
no,
what?
like I wasn't fighting during the time that I was in the wrestling season, so they didn't.
Yeah, but I mean, like as soon as you got done, you start fighting. They don't mind if you fight in the off season at all.
I don't, nah, because like they're, you know, you never know with kids, man. They never know when if the kids are even gonna come back to college. You know, so yeah, I didn't really get any. There was no really any concerns, I think, about that situation at the time.
You probably just didn't care also on top of it.
Well, we really didn't talk about it, to be honest. I mean, it wasn't until a little bit later that I started getting more name recognition. They started putting me in newspapers and shit like that. Then coaches were like, hey, this is going to start to grow a little bit. You got to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. And that was about it. That was the conversation.
So those are your first two records on Fight. Both of them obviously ended with a KO. Karl Zamora was very surprising at how fast it went down. There's no video on either of those. And on your third listed fight, you fought Charlie Fortek at the Napa High School. And what's crazy is you got Mike Kyle in the main event. Is that what kind of brought you to AKA later on?
No, I brought Mike Kyle to AKA.
Okay.
I was the only other fighters before me at AKA and they weren't even there before me, except for Frank Shamrock and Brian Johnston were the ones before me. Then there was me. Then there was BJ Penn. So BJ Penn and I came around the same time. So there's Brian Johnston was wrestling it. He fought in UFC 3. I think it was 3. Oof. And then, and he fought again in another UFC. I can't remember which one. And then he went over and became a pro wrestler over in Japan for a while, then fought in Pride. He was, they were all good friends with, Randleman and the Japanese wrestlers, Fujita and those guys, Don Fry and those guys. Anyways, so then he came, and then what was it called? So it was just me, Frank Shamrock, BJ Penn were like the main guys there. Was there as well. He had fought in UFC, but Bob was my manager at the time. He started shifting into becoming my manager because he was done fighting. And that was it, man. There was no one else. Mike Kyle came years after I was already in the UFC.
How did you decide how did you go? Why did you go there? What brought you from Idaho to there? How that transition?
Well, I was born and raised in San Jose. So then I moved to Idaho, and then I came back down. I was going to try to go to college down here in California after I got done wrestling in college up there and was fighting. I was like, I knew that Frank Shamrock was also down there. So I walked into AK where Frank Shamrock was. And that's how I met Bob Cook, Charles Taylor, Kelly Delonte. They were all there training under Frank Shamrock. Dave Velasquez, a bunch of guys that were fighting MMA, but they hadn't been in the UFC yet. I think Dave Velasquez had fought Jens Pulver in the UFC, I think, already, and he didn't have a very good showing, but there was that. And then, I was supposed to fight Matt Serra. I ended up getting hurt. And then Kelly Delonte got into the UFC that way. And then Rich Crunkleton came and started training with us. And then it was and then shortly after that, Mike Kyle came, Paul Bonatello came. Then I brought Trevor Prangley with me as soon as I could. Around 2001, Trevor came down, started living with me and training with me, and then going back home after every fight. So he'd come down and stay 4 weeks with me and train, and then he'd go back up to Idaho and train there. So that was kind of how it all started.
How did you meet Kyle? Because he's a little bit of a controversial figure, and I think Justin Eilers also has ties to that area, and him and Kyle had a rivalry. Can you?
It wasn't a rivalry. It wasn't a rivalry at all. They were really good friends.
Oh, that's right. They were friends.
Yeah,
they were forced to fight in the UFC.
Yeah, which is strange because Mike Kyle was like, I'm not gonna really take that fight, and I was like, no, I'm taking that fight. So then Mike Kyle was like, all right, well, fuck it. I guess we're fighting. Mm-hmm. Because at the time, right? Dana wasn't trying to hear all that bullshit. Are you either a fighter or you're not? And so that was the issue. But they were friends. They grew up. They played football together in Boise. Mike Kyle's from that Boise area. And the reason why how I met Mike Kyle was 16 when I fought Brandon Shuey. He was on the undercard.
Wow.
So he was 16 years old fighting, and he was on the undercard. I was like, man, this kid's big. He was huge. He was bigger than what he was when he got into the UFC. He was bigger then. You know, he still had that baby, that baby fat on him. But he was 16 years old, just smashing dudes. I was like, all right, cool, man. But he was on the undercard of that show when I was the main event against Brandon Shuey. And then, yeah, it really just depended on who was the promoter at the time. And, you know, like the Charlie Fortex fight and I should have probably been the main event, but then it was Mike Kyle and somebody else. You know, I think you just look at the bigger guys and go, hey, this is kind of, you know, this is the bigger guys. Mm-hmm. And it was also local. Napa's local to Boise area there. So they were probably thinking like Mike Kyle has a bigger name locally. It's going to bring more tickets. So that made sense.
So,
you know,
one of the more controversial fights, I actually sent the video to Chris that I saw on your record, was at Plains High School at the Ultimate Combat Championships against Justin Curtis. Why don't you walk us through it before Chris and I kind of give us our input? This is a fantastic.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let me explain this to you.
What had happened was
this guy says, "Come, we're gonna have fights. You know, I'm gonna have you and I will fight. You know, I'm the promoter, but you and I will fight." And I was like, all right, okay. So we go there. First, we get there, no hotel, so we have to sleep at a campsite nearby. No hotel. We sleep at a campsite. There's me, Trevor Prangley, my other buddy Jeremy, and there was like one of our other like smaller, younger fighters that was on there as well. I'm like, all right. So I show up. It's not even a cage. It's a fucking wrestling mat in a gym.
with
no, I'm thinking to myself,
no ropes, nothing. This
no
can't count as a real fight.
This doesn't even count as a real fight. I'm like, all right, okay.
It's the best.
Yeah. I'm just like, fuck. Okay, so it was supposed to be that I was gonna get paid. Like it was supposed to be like I think about $500. Oh, we show up, we realize that there's no one there.
There's no way you're getting paid.
The's no crowds.
I was like, first off, we didn't even get a fucking hotel. So we're like, all right, so how are you paying? Like, if we didn't get a hotel, you must be just using our hotel money to fucking pay us. So we were cool with the no hotel thing. We slept out at the campsite. There was like a river that ran by it. It was cool. We stayed for another day after the fights and stuff, and it was fine. What was the most disturbing thing was this: is that he's the promoter. His high school wrestling coach is the ref. His mom, his dad, and his like brother-in-law are the judges.
Seems like a fair shake.
Yeah, what's wrong with that?
It's a family business. It's
what are you saying?
His real brother, I think, is working the front door. I can't like.
Yeah, there was a lot of work for him. There was no one there.
And there was maybe, I would say maybe 50 people there.
Here's the thing: there's not even any chairs. I mean, there was no chairs set up. There's a few people standing around the background.
And I'm thinking to myself, all right. I just knew. Look, I think I dropped him with a punch, and then I dropped him 2 or 3 times with leg kicks. I want to say 2 times with leg kicks. Somehow I lost the fight, and then I never got paid. So I said basically I was like, it's not even a fucking fight. It's an amateur fight. I didn't get paid. I didn't get a hotel. I'm like, I'm not counting this shit on my record, but yet they have it on my record, and I'm like, I should have never lost that fucking fight.
So, I mean, what year did that fight take place? What fight did those actions take place? Because it's not a fight.
Got to be 99. Yeah. Got to be 99.
It was around 98, 99, somewhere around there. I think it was, it was probably like around that end of 98 or in the night. It was a summer. I know it was during the summer because we were out by the river there in Montana. So in essence, and the water was warm enough for us to get in. So it was probably like around July and August.
That was their shower in the morning. Yeah.
So it was.
Well, I know Trevor a little bit, and Jossh said his dad was a mountain man. So, like, let me. These guys were better prepared than say me and Mike.
For sure.
So let me kind of break this down. It's fantastic. So it's a 10-minute round.
Yeah.
The last 4 minutes, Jossh is trying to get an armbar, and the guy is just holding onto his arm, where Jossh just kind of reaches back and cracks him. And then you hear in the video, well, now they got to go to overtime. And he said, no overtime. Yeah. So the tape kind of cuts, and then you just read the decision. Like, it was supposed to be an overtime. It's amazing. It's amazing.
here's the thing. You know how they got that video? Because once the websites came around, and that's how you report your records, he fucking sent the video in. And on his, like, back then it was MySpace. He was sending the video to all the websites saying that I beat Jossh Thomson. And then I'm like, have you not seen the fight? Have you not seen it? Like, like in your mind, did you think you really won the fight? And so then on top of that, like, he was the one posting all this shit about, like, oh yeah, I beat him, and you know, look at this video, and everyone, and I can see in the comments like I wouldn't have wanted
to show the video. I would have just said, look at the record, because you see the video. Like I said, that's one thing I picked up. I hit him with the shot, knocked him down, and you walk away, stand up. You kicked him a couple times. I mean, it wasn't like you kicked him 30 times and he fell leg shot. You kicked him with a good leg shot and he fell down a couple times. So like one shot, and then he was like, butts. I mean, so you're like, no, get back up. So yeah, I wouldn't have been bragging about that to show everybody that look at this evidence that I won.
Yeah, he was, like you said, he was butt scooting around. I'm like, get up. And I kept walking away from him, like, get up, get up, get up. He didn't want to get up. And that's kind of how that's why the new rules is a good system. Like, if you say get up, the guy's got to get up.
Well, when we talk to like a lot of 50 Fight Club members, and there's certain benchmarks that you have to hit in order to be really like well-traveled as a fighter, getting ripped off and, things like of that nature. But also you have to have somebody on your record that has parties around pay-per-views that you just so happen to be on, so he can kind of like explain to everybody about the greatest moment of his life that he ever had. And I had no idea he was fighting tonight, guys, but thank you for coming over to watch this. That's it for you.
Yeah, there was times, it was so funny. There was one time where I fought Kajan Johnson in Idaho.
Into that.
Yeah. Was it in Idaho? I can't remember where it was. Anyways, I fought Kajan Johnson somewhere in Idaho, and I was living in California at the time, so I flew up to fight him. He came down from Canada, and in that fight, at TriStar.
Yeah.
Where was that at? TriStar.
It was at North American Sport Fighting International. You were the main event. Yeah. And elbows got him.
Yeah. Every time I hit him, he was like making these noises, and so then like I was, and while I brought him over the corner because we were fighting in ropes, and I'm telling Bob, I was telling Bob, every time I elbow him, Bob's like, yeah, he's quitting, and then you could just see he started wilting because Bob Cook was like, yeah, in the corner, keep elbowing, he don't like that shit, he can't handle it, he's gonna quit. And sure enough, shortly after, he started cleaning, because there was one elbow I hit him with clean, and he made the noise just like, and I was like, all right, just flurry right now and get this out of here. But yeah, good stuff. I mean, like, he was tough. He was a lot tougher than I thought. I thought he was gonna be super athletic and not have any skill, but he was good. He was tough. He's strong for such a young kid. He was young too. I want to say he was only like 19 or 20 when I fought him. He was
3-1, and he was later on the Ultimate Fighter, the Canada versus Australia series. But prior to that, you also fought in Bushido 1 in Tempe, Arizona, against Jason Abidjan.
Yeah, that was. I tell people.
Ride?
What's that?
Was it your first plane ride to a fight?
No. I flew down to Boise when I fought Brandon Shuey because I didn't want to drive 8 hours. It's a long time. Okay. No, I'm gonna tell you another great story about that freaking fight. That was my first fight with Frank Shamrock under his promotion, and I got stiffed by him too.
That's because Frank didn't have many, legs on that promotion, though.
He's fucking one of the biggest fucking scam artists when it came to paying people out, man. I was like, what are you doing, man? He was supposed to pay me $1,000. He was supposed to pay me $1,000 if I won. I hit. So Jason Abidjan was also I believe he was an All-American from Arizona State Wrestling. Good, super nice kid. Came out, had a couple exchanges, threw the straight right, dropped him. As he went down, I threw the head kick. Like, as he was going down, I hit him right across the face, and he went into convulsions. I was still telling people that's my most vicious knockout I've ever had, ever. Like, he hit the ground, and his arms went straight, and his legs went stiff, and I felt so bad for him, because we were talking a little bit beforehand at the weigh-ins and stuff, and he seemed like a really nice kid. I didn't get to talk to him a whole lot after that. But then
he was at the hospital. He was at the hospital.
Yeah.
I wasn't real talkative.
We get done with the fight. And Frank's like, oh, I think maybe that was a little bit of an illegal kick. And I'm like, he wasn't on the ground. I hit him before he hit the ground. Like, and and he's like, so he's like, I'm gonna deduct your win bonus. So he takes my $500, fucking keeps it for himself, and fucking only pays me $500.
Hold on. First of all, unless it's a kickboxing match, if you hit him, even if he's on the ground, you're still allowed to hit him back in the head back then, weren't you?
No, well, I mean, like the rules were, because no, this was still kind of like they were trying to go by the UFC rules, the unified rules or whatever. No head kicks on the ground, no stomping the head or kicking the head on the ground.
What year was this?
This was 2001.
Yeah, January 18th, 2001.
Okay, I was gonna say back in 2000s, it's still, at least where I was in Indiana, you were allowed to kick in the head still back in 2000, where I was. Like I said, rules were different every time you went there, so never mind.
But Josh, do you remember when Frank would jump on? Like California was really kind of coming on with just fights every weekend, and Frank would jump on all of the cards, not just like one of the cards. He'd have like 10 fights lined up, and he would make these guys, he'd sign a contract and he'd say, okay, well, you know, I need my training money up front. And then he'd always like pull out. He'd always be injured. Like he did it like 3 or 4 times where I remember talking to one of the promoters and he's just like, he got me for like 30 grand in training fees.
I don't know about that. I just know what I can speak on with him in terms of, you know, with the whole, I got stiffed over the $500 because it was apparently a legal kick, and I was like,
wow.
Bro,
he's also the commission. A little bit of an illegal kick.
Yeah. Bob, here's the thing. I knew that Bob Cook was going to be my manager for the rest of my life after that, because he actually is like, look, he tried to pay me he's like, look, Frank didn't want to pay you. He's like, so here, I'll give you the $500. And I knew Bob. Bob didn't have a lot of money, man. Bob didn't have a lot of money. He's like, you know, he's like, I know you won. He's like, you won that fight. He's like, that was kind of a prick move that he did. He's like, here, he's trying to pay me $500. I was like, no, Bob, I'm not taking your money, man. He would drive Monday through Thursday. He would drive 2.5 hours to come coach us every day. He would drive. He'd go back and forth from Fresno, you know, and every day he'd drive after he'd work a full 8 hours, go back, and then he'd fucking drive back home that night. And then fucking and then go to work the next day, come back and coach us again. And then eventually he just started becoming our full-time coach. We started paying him like in purses, started managing and stuff like that. So he quit his he was a logger. He's fucking climbing trees, fucking tree topping trees all day. And then
savage.
Just fucking savage, man. He'd be up at 4 a.m. He'd work from like 5:30 until like say 2:30 or 3. Then he'd drive down drive all the way up to San Jose. And that's what they called him, Crazy Bob. And he'd fucking coach us until 10 o'clock at night. We'd all go to Jack in the Box afterwards and get those chicken fajitas, the chicken fajita pitas. We'd go get a couple of those. And then he'd drive all the way back home. And sometimes he was too tired. And I'd say, hey, just come stay at my house. He'd sleep in my house. And eventually we became roommates. He was my manager for my whole career, man. We eventually became roommates. Yeah,
that's awesome, man.
He was a roommate. You know, he was my roommate. Him and I we'd rent the place, you know, together. And he was only there Monday through Thursday. So there's no better roommate than that. A guy who pays half your rent is only there. He'd go home to his family on the weekends. And I mean, I had the whole house in my house on the weekend. I was like a rock star to every person I knew.
And I always tell people it's very important, in my opinion, when you get started, you have to get a trainer that you like respect and listen to and trust. And same thing with the manager, because those are two very important people. A lot of people get these trainers and, you know, they always like, I'm going to go over to American Top Team. I'm going to go to AK. I'm going to go wherever because they're better over there. I'm like, you know what? When you go there, they didn't develop you. You don't have that bond, that relationship.
Yeah.
You're just kind of like a paycheck to them in a way. I mean, if you go in, you move in, you're already established. That's what you are. You got to be around people who've been there for you from the beginning. You respect and you trust. Same thing with the manager. If you get to go to these managerial, like a firm where there's like 50 clients, you know what? They might use you for bargaining chip. Like I'll give you Chris, but then you owe me 3 fights. I mean, that stuff happens. So you got to be in there with people, you know, respect and trust very well. And a lot of people don't see it like that. Like, oh, I'm going to go here because this is Conor McGregor's manager or whatever, you know, but you have to go there stay with the people who get you there, man. It bothers me when people don't do that.
No, I agree. You know, you've got to have a token of like, sometimes you got to make the adjustments, you know, like there were some things when I was working with Javier Mendez, right? It just wasn't like our rhythm and our flow wasn't working for a while, you know, a little bit towards the end of the career. It was like, so I started bringing in another kickboxing coach that was just a lot of using a lot more kicks and a lot more boxing, mixing it all together in terms of combinations and repetitions. Whereas Javier was more of the boxing with the occasional kicks here and there for a while. You know, he was dealing with some injuries, so it was harder for him to hold, you know, his forearms and his wrists and stuff were starting to bother him. And so we went through a phase where I was bringing in another kickboxing coach to kind of help me out. But I mean, outside of that, I always had kind of the same jiu-jitsu coach that Dave Camarillo for almost the majority of my career. And then Dave left and went to another gym. And then we brought in another guy for a while there as well. But I really only had 2 jiu-jitsu coaches my whole career. Yeah. And so, you know, but it's like you try to stay with the loyal people you try, but you know, sometimes it doesn't work out. I just knew that I was loyal to the gym. That was the biggest thing.
Yeah. And there is situations like I've had people when the people who brought them in were not good people and they're teaching them the wrong things. Like, man, you got to get out of that. That's a toxic situation. You need to, but I mean, when you early on in your career, you need to figure this type of stuff out and go with people who you know are there for the right reason. I mean, if you can get that who understand you, there's just too many people who I feel like are just constantly looking for answers and they're blaming. Yep. They lose and they go to a new gym and then they lose that when they go to a new place. I'm like, hey man, you might want to look in the mirror. You got to be around people who you trust, but they have to be the right people. You can't just be, you can't be loyal to a fault. And that's a problem as well. So yeah, I know what you're saying.
I was loyal to a fault. There were some times where I could have, should have left, you know, AKA, but I didn't. You know, I was loyal to the fact that, like, you know, there was some growth there that I could see. And I also knew that too, I was getting towards the end of my career. So the attention wasn't all about me when I was 23, 24, 25. That was different. You know what I mean? Then versus the, you know, as I got older, it just wasn't the same. Wasn't the same attention. It wasn't the same type of progression. You know, so things kind of, people started spotlight, you know, the coaches started to spotlight a little bit more. But I think that's common in some gyms. But regardless, like if you look at, when you were talking about fighters, when they lose, they go to another gym. And I never wanted to be that fighter. That was one. And then 2 is when you go to another gym, it takes you time to get into their routine of what's going on. And I've seen fighters as of recently, you know, leave, like Marlon Moraes. You know, he left Mark Henry, you know, out there with Frankie Edgar and those guys. Him and Barboza left and went down to ATT. Now, Barboza's had a little bit of success since they've been at ATT. You know, just lost a fight, but he had some good wins, you know, in the process. But Marlon Moraes hasn't been the same. Like he hasn't been able to get some wins since he's been there. And so, and it's not, I don't think it's anything against ATT at all, because they produce some of the best fighters in the world. But the routine, it's the routine of which you've got to get into a groove. And sometimes when people leave, like you leave an area like New Jersey, like there ain't nothing to do there but train in the miserable winter and all the other shit, right? And the humid weather and shit like that. You get into Florida, it's like shit. It's sunny all year around. Like, you know what? I'm gonna go ride my longboard, or I'm gonna go ride my one wheel, or I'm gonna go, you know, hit the beach. Whatever it is, like your life changes in just in your location and what that location provides for you to take your eyes and your focus off of, you know, being the champ or training all the time. So who knows?
So you've mentioned several high-end wrestlers that you fought up until this time. And your next bout is at Gladiator Valley Tudo, where you run into another real good wrestler in Victor Estrada.
Aha. Yeah, I remember that fight. Yeah, I was training already down here at AKA, and I was like, this guy doesn't have shit for me. And I don't want to say I took him. I had seen him fight before. I knew he was a dog. I knew he was gritty. I knew all of those things. I just didn't think that he was going to be as gritty as he was. I knew he'd be tough. I was like, but he's got nothing. He was like one of those kids that had like he was like skinny. It was like almost like skinny fat. Like he just had the soft body. He had and nothing against, he's my boy, and I'm nothing against him either, Victor Estrada. But he had like a Cain Velasquez type body, where but he had conditioning and heart and cardio, and he just had everything that I had. Like, then I was like, man, pushing on him. I don't know if I took him lightly or what, but it was a way harder fight than I wanted it to be. But I ended up working out. I had to dig deep for that one because he wouldn't stop. He wouldn't stop coming, and I wouldn't stop coming. And we had some great exchanges and some good fight. It was a great fight. It was miserable while I was in it, fucking dealing with it. But it was one of those fights where you have to sometimes wonder, are you a real fighter or are you a quitter? You know, and I think that's a question that I think a lot of fighters want to know. Like, will I keep fighting?
You know, I don't think anybody at this point in your career ever kind of challenged your grit. But you pull off a second round submission, but you also had your sights set much further than that, because at the end of that fight, you gave Dennis Hallman the finger.
Oh yeah.
What was that about?
Yeah, because Dennis. Here's the thing, Dennis and Victor Estrada and all those guys were from somewhere in Washington, and we would see them at almost all the events, and all they would do is talk shit. All they would do is fucking. And at the time, because I was training at AKA down, Dennis Hallman had some, like, he had pulled a prank off on Frank Shamrock. Frank had came up to coach Bob Cook and Dave Velasquez at one of the events that I think Dennis Hallman, like, his friends were being the promoters for. And what they did was they went and put a big trash can and leaned it against Frank's door, and they knocked on the door. Frank opened the door, and all the water fucking flew into Frank's hotel room.
Wow.
So Frank peeks out the door and sees who it was, and he goes chasing after him. And then they go running into their room. He kicks their door down, and they're running out the window. So he sees they left their cell phones, their wallets, they left everything there, their Walkmans. So what he does is he fills up the fucking tub, and he throws all their shit into the fucking tub. So he fills up the tub with water, and he grabs their wallets. He cuts up all their credit cards. He cuts up, he tears their wallets, takes their money and rips it up. Takes their money. Actually didn't rip it up. Takes their money. But they left their watches. They left their cell phones. They left everything there. So he took all their shit and threw it into the tub. And he's just like, yeah, fuck you guys. So, yeah. And so then there was a little bit of beef between, like, AK or Frank and us and, Bob Cook and those guys. And so they were talking hella shit, like, before that fight. Because I had Bob Cook with me in that fight. Thank God. Because, I mean, him and Trevor were like my two godsends during that time, because I respected Trevor a lot. And Bob Cook was my manager / my training partner, and someone who always had an eye for what I was good at. And he always just knew, like, hey, he was somebody that I knew no matter what would tell me what it was. Like, you need to win this fucking round. If you don't win this round, you're losing this fight. Or, he's beating you much. You need to go for a two-way round. I needed to hear that shit. I need a solution. I don't need to hear, like, okay, well, it was close. Maybe you won. I don't need to hear that shit. I need to hear what I got to do to win the next round. And so Bob was that guy that always told me the straight, and I loved him for it. And that's why we're still very, very close to this day.
I think to be honest, everything you guys said about manager and that relationship, but a little part of it with you is luck, because Bob's a special dude. I think that's a serious thing.
No, he is, man. I say that about him all the time. He's someone that I got really lucky. I tell people this. I came down to California at the end of 98, 99. I was there for 1 year. And then I went back home up to Idaho for a while, for the year from 2000. Took in the New Year's, got in a big ass fight there, got arrested, was getting ready to serve some jail time, all this bullshit, right? Wow. And so I moved. I asked the judge. I said, "Can I move back down to California to pursue my training career? I'll come back for court. Promise I won't miss out." He's like, "Okay." He said, "You got to check in with your probation officer, or your people letting us know that you're still planning on coming and all these locations." I'm like, "All right, cool." So I did that, man. And I thank God for that judge every single day, because he allowed me to go back down to AKA. And I went back down to California and I trained. And a year went by and I had to go to court, got sentenced to 6 months in jail, did my time, got out. And then, I was already during that time, I got signed by the UFC. And so that's why when I got signed at like UFC 32. I didn't fight till UFC 44 because I was doing 6 months in jail at the time. Plus I needed to get into a camp, all this other stuff. And so, Bob was a guy that during that whole court time, he had convinced me to come down. He was the guy that called me up. He said, "I heard you got in a lot of trouble." He's like, "Is there any way you can just come back down and start training?" He's like, "We'll get you on track. We'll get you some fights, get you some money, get you working towards a career in fighting." He's like, "You're good. You're talented." He talked me back into moving back down. So I asked the judge, and the judge said yes. And I went down, and the rest is history, man. Bob took care of me from that moment on. And I thank God for him, because even when I had to go back up even a year later, I was a wreck, man. I was like, I don't know. I thought maybe I was going to do more than 6 months. I got lucky. The judge saved my life. The judge gave me a withheld judgment, so I don't have any felonies on my record because I got convicted of 2 felonies. He gave me a withheld judgment, wiped them off my record. He only gave me 6 month time, and it was I understood. I had a $30,000 fine, which I had to pay, and I just it took time for me to pay that, but it was rough, man. It was rough, especially when I wasn't making any money. I had no idea where I was going and what I was doing. But when I moved out and I came back, Bob and I got a place together, and he made sure that my rent was only $150 a month to help pay for things. And the two of us lived together, man. And like, we had a great, I owe a lot to him. I owe a lot. And so when I talk about him, I talk to him in such high regard because he's a fucking phenomenal person. He's somebody that's just the grain of salt of the earth. And he's fucking amazing.
Well, when a person is really a great person, when they don't expect anything other than you just to kind of show up and be in their lives. That's all he wanted. He wanted you to be better. That's it.
Yep. No, that's the thing is, it's funny. He just had his birthday, and I just had my birthday, and we have our birthdays around the same time. We call each other. It's funny. I call, and he calls me. Like, he called me this year a day late. He's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, punk." He's like, "I missed your birthday, man." He's like, "I know you're always on time for mine." He's like, "But I want to let you know I was thinking of you and today, and I remember today, and I apologize I didn't get to you yesterday. I just got caught up." And he almost felt like it was like a sense of regret. I'm like, "Bob, you can miss my birthday fucking 3 years in a row. Every time you call me, it's just a joy. I see your name on my phone, man. I love it, dude. Like, it just feels good. You see the name on the top of your phone, and you're like, what's going on, man? How you doing? And so that's it. Awesome. I got a lot of love for him.
Nice.
Now, real quick, you just said he said punk. How did that nickname come to be? I mean, give us that story.
So, like, you don't give yourself your own name. If you could, I would show something really cool. I would have like the Vitor Belfort or the VJ Penn Prodigy or something like that. I would have done something really cool, but no, I got stuck with that. It really just came down to, I was the guy like in the gym that I like to, since I was a smaller guy, but I was also the guy that was outside of BJ Penn and myself. We were the only two guys in the UFC at the time. The rest of the guys, John Fitch, Ryan Eversole, Josh Koscheck, Kane, none of them were in the UFC yet. I was in the UFC already. And so they were just getting into this whole thing. And I was the guy that kind of always stirred the pot. Like Mike Kyle had just came, Paul Bonatello. I was the guy that would like talk shit to Mike Kyle, but then I would turn around and talk shit to Paul Bonatello. And eventually by the time the end of the day was, I'd have the two of them fighting with each other. And I would like slowly remove myself from the conversation. And so it kind of became that, like, with Javier, I would always tell him, we'd start the conversation like, we were talking about like Miguel Cotto and Margarito when they were boxing. I said, Miguel Cotto's the fucking better. I said, Miguel Cotto's going to win this fight. I said, Margarito's going to win this fight. It was the first one. I said, Margarito's going to win this fight. I said, he's just better. He's like, no, Miguel Cotto's the technical boxer. I said, I would just get it. I'd keep bragging on him. I was like, no way. And I was like, I don't care who the technical boxer is. I said, he's going to win this fight. Margarito's going to win this fight. Little did I know he was going to cheat. But it was still the gloves. It was still that whole with the fucking clay
cast. He put on cast.
Yeah, exactly.
You knew. Why you tell me?
Yeah. So then fucking we get done with by the end of the conversation, I've already bet Hav for a steak dinner at any location I want because I'm that guy. I'll get you going in one direction and then I'll change the argument. But then you believe in your argument so much that I end up betting you, knowing that I'm going to win. I was like, there's no way. Margarito's 5'11", long range jab, like got big power, like, just output. Miguel Cotto slows down. I was like, oh man, for sure. I didn't know he was going to cheat, but I ended up winning that. And then the second time they fought, I went against what I said in the first fight. And so he thought Margarito was still going to beat him. He said, oh, Margarito's the way he beat him the first time. I'm like, yeah, but he cheated. I said, I got Cotto this time. And he's like, no, Margarito's going to be able to outbox him again. He's going to do this. I'm like, no, man, no. So I got him going on that, and we bet another steak dinner. He still owes me, I think, like 14 or 15 steak dinners. I just find ways to get people to make bets that they're not supposed to make, in fights that, nice. they should. Yeah. So I'm not that way. The other thing is too, is like, if you got me, like I was one of those guys, if you got me in a triangle or something like that, I'd stick my thumb in your ass, to get out in training. I didn't like to be submitted. So there was those kind of things.
The old wrestling move.
Yeah. On another note, man, I would just recommend maybe you got to be careful if you start messing with Dennis Hallman because we heard from him before about some of the stuff him and like he do to Munson, man. I mean, put on furniture on top of his roof one time. I'm like, dude, I don't want to mess with that dude. He's got a lot of minions who will like mess with you for years, man. I don't.
Oh, Dennis Hallman?
Yeah.
Oh, man. We went through this phase for a while. Then then eventually, like after my UFC, my first stint in the UFC, we kind of met at a couple locations up in Idaho, and when the fights were going on, and it was me, Guy Metzger, Dan Henderson, Dennis Hallman was there, like two or three other guys were there. So we all decided, like, hey, we're all going to be down here. Why don't we get some grappling in? So we were all training together. And Dennis, he always got to the back. He always found a way to get to the back. And he was like one of the first guys to kind of start using that body triangle. And I was one of the first. I was the first guy. He's like, dude, no one knows how to get out of that body triangle. And I was escaping with ease. He just was baffled by the fact that I knew how to get out of the body triangle so easily. And so we kind of hit it off after that, and the exchanges and the grappling, and and he's like, wow, you're a lot better than I thought in terms of, like, he goes, he's bigger than me. He's like, I thought I was going to handle you a lot more. And it was pretty impressive. He's like, you're pretty damn good. I'm like, well, I should be, man. Like, fucking, you know what I mean? Like, we've been doing this long enough. We should be good at this shit. So I think, you got to remember, I think he had already beaten Matt Hughes twice, previous to that. And so I was expecting him to just maul me and destroy me. And it wasn't that way. And we had some good exchanges. It was good. So I think we developed a little bit of a friendship after that. I was good friends with Benji Raddick too. Benji was a great guy.
Real good guy.
Really good guy. And so I was friends with him. And so he kind of was with Dennis Hallman. And so that's kind of how I became friends with Benji. And that kind of I think trickled over into the Dennis Hallman thing.
That's cool. So you flew out to Hawaii. I apologize, Miguel.
Yeah.
For Shogun 1 against, man, an absolute legend in Kid Yamamoto.
Yeah.
At 155, I might add.
No, 143.
Oh, yeah.
You cut all the way down.
It's 155. Yeah.
No. I wish it was 155.
You didn't have any issues with his power at all, did you?
No. I didn't have any issues with his power. I mean, it was his speed I was having a hard time with. He was fast. He was really fast. And his rest was good. He was kind of strong, in terms of the rest, but he was real stiff. So he didn't want to open up at all. There was no ground and pound. There was not I expected him to be really aggressive in the ground and pound because I had seen a couple of his previous fights. I knew his wrestling was good. He was on the Olympic team until he got booted off. His sister was, I think, an Olympic gold medalist. I think he's got two sisters in the Olympics for wrestling. I think one of them ended up being an Olympic gold medalist or a bronze medal. I think a 2-time medalist. So that was a fight I took on 2 weeks notice.
How did you get it? How did that fight get lined up?
So Philip Perez was supposed to fight. Philip Perez was part of Team Fresno / AKA's team because we had just signed with the Zinkins. So they had joined the whole Team Fresno and AKA had all joined together. So now they were all kind of managed under Bob Cook. And so that's how it all started. Well, then he takes the fight to fight Kid Yamamoto. Well, he's holding pads for his buddy. And his buddy misses the pad, kicks him in the head, and knocks him out. And so the promoter of that, I don't know if you know, the promoter of that Shogun was Sean Shelby.
Really?
I didn't know that.
Sean Shelby and his ex-wife Helen were the promoters and the matchmaker. And they had this big wig guy. I don't know where he was from, but he was a big money backer. And so that was the first fight I ever got paid a ton of money, man. I got paid $2,000 for that fight. That was a big time fight for me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You were 5'10", he was 5'4". There was obviously, and you, all right. There's certain times in people's careers where you kind of see them level up. I think you leveled up after this fight because you were keeping your hands to your body. And once you put your hands in front of you and that, you weren't fighting as short, that's when your game just changed. And at that point, you weren't there just yet.
Yeah, the thing is with him, this is what I had to remember with him is once I realized how fast he was, I had to keep my hands closer to my chin because he was hitting me with shots before I could even react. So if my hands would have got away from me, I would have probably got knocked out. I mean, he had some power, but it was the speed in which he got it there, which was real concerning to me. And he did everything off of the punching right into his takedowns. And his technique on his takedowns it was just good. And I was like, shit, he was in to my legs and already turning the corner or taking me down before I could even start to defend. He was so fast. And the other thing as well is when we showed up in Hawaii, I was I had to cut 28 pounds in little over 25 hours.
What?
So I spent, because I took the fight on 2 weeks notice. I was 169, 170 when I took the fight. So 2 weeks later, I mean, I was focused on just training. I was always training every day, but I had to up the increase, got into shape. I had to go run. I was running as much as I could. At the time, I didn't know really shit about dieting. So I was just kind of eating whatever, and I didn't really have a lot of money. So I was kind of I was living off fucking, chicken noodle soup and shit like that to kind of just give me the energy to get through. And so, it was, I wasn't barbecuing at the time. I wasn't eating like chicken breast. I wasn't doing any of that shit. I was just eating whatever I could get my hands on because I could afford. And so, that's kind of how the routine was. And with him, he was good, man. He was just fast. He was good. But I just remember that week of the fight, I remember him walking around at all the press conferences and everything like that. He always had food in his hand. I was like, you son of a bitch. Because I was starving. I was so damn hungry. This guy's walking around with a bottle of water and food in his hand the whole time, eating the whole damn time. Every day he was eating. I was like, this guy, I'm going to fucking kill this kid.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I know the fight was not what it should have been in terms of that fight, the way it went down, but it was kind of a blessing in disguise for me. I got signed by the UFC right after that. That's the fight that got me into the UFC.
Well, why don't you explain what took place in that fight?
Yeah, so what took place in that fight was he came out. We were having some good exchanges. The speed was getting to me. He was hitting me, but I was countering, but he was moving out of the way. But I started getting a little bit of his timing by the end of the first round. The second round comes in, and we start off, and then I started kind of chasing him down a little bit because I could tell he was getting a little bit tired.
Yeah.
So he was having to use a lot of speed and explosiveness to get me down. And then, he's throwing heavy shots because it wasn't affecting me. So he kept trying to throw harder and harder. I could tell he was getting tired. I wouldn't say he was exhausted, but I could tell he was getting tired.
He was starting to bend.
Yeah, he wasn't the same fighter in the second round as he was in the first. And so then, so then we just came out and and he stepped in trying to land a shot, leg kick. He's shorter and it slid right up his leg into his cup and actually broke his cup.
Oh, dude.
Yeah, he was wearing one of those plastic. He's wearing one of those plastic cups. It actually broke his cup, and so fight was done, man. He's like,
Josh got everything.
We got it all, man. Yeah, it was shin to the nuts. It was shin to the nuts. There was no foot. It was all shin.
He was so hurt. Sometimes guys will kind of bounce on the ground, on their butt. He couldn't even. Dude, he was squirting water down there. There was no recovering. He was done.
Oh yeah, he was one of those. But he's a stud, man. That guy was a stud. Rest in peace, my man. I love that guy.
Especially at 135. I mean, he's up a weight class.
Yeah.
I always wanted to see him and Miguel Torres fight because they were both peaking at the same time. And the one opportunity that they had to do it, they offered Miguel $500 and no cornerman to go out to Japan. And Miguel was making $20,000 at the Hallman Civic Center. And he's like, I'll give him $2,000 and fly out 3 cornermen. He can fight me here. And they weren't going to meet. Yeah, that was the fight. So from there, obviously you got signed by the UFC. It didn't work out. But you do fight after that in the main event at the Northwest Submission Fighting Championship in Redwood City California against Doug Evans. Demon Doug Evans, not the one that fought in Bellator. Yeah,
that wasn't in Redwood City, California. No, that was in Idaho.
You know what? He's a Redwood City, California native.
Yeah.
Come on, Mike. Not again.
No, we fought up in Idaho. Yeah, I was the main event. I think I was the main event for that card.
Is that like Tim Leitchik, Eugene Jackson, Doug Evans guy? That was he their training partner?
No. Different one. Yes.
Okay.
It's linked on your Wikipedia. No, Miguel, that's a really good question. It's linked as if it is, but it's not. This is more of a body type Doug Evans and probably a last minute replacement type situation. Because
we were scheduled to fight. We actually scheduled that fight and carried through. I thought he was from where was I thinking? I thought he was from a different location, but he might have been from Redwood City like that.
He was Redwood City
area. Yeah, he is.
There's very little on him. Very little.
Yeah. But he was super strong. Like one of those guys that just had physical strength, was short, stocky, but really strong. He just put himself into a really shitty position with me, and I locked in the triangle and it was done. But the beginning part of my career was a lot of submissions.
So in essence, Jossh goes from there. He talked about Kajan Johnson from TriStar, and then your coming out party. There was no denying who you were at WFA 3 against Rob McCullough. Razor Rob is an absolute savage, and he's known for his stand-up, and you didn't care. Like, I didn't understand watching that, whether it's just, maybe young and dumb, but the way you went at him and just dominated, it was just like, most people would be a little conservative with him. You weren't at all.
Yeah, because I had actually seen him fight a bunch of times in the WC at the Lemoore Fairgrounds, Lemoore Casino, whatever.
Lemoore, California.
Yeah, Lemoore, California. I'd seen him fight a couple times there. He was just starching dudes, and the reason why he was starching them is because they weren't putting any pace on him. They were letting him stand in the center of the ring or the cage, and he was dictating like when they struck, like they were trying to catch him off of a counter, or they couldn't stop it. They couldn't get a takedown on him because they were too hesitant to step in because they didn't want to get hit. So I had trained with a lot of really good kickboxers at the time. This kid named Danny Kelly, another kid named Travis Johnson, Gary Owens, all these guys. Gary Owens had fought Rob McCullough, and I very similar in styles in terms of kickboxing, like K1 level kickboxers. And so when I was training with those guys, and I just knew that with those guys, every time I put them on their back foot, they weren't the same fighter. And so I had to make sure that I never gave them a second to breathe. There was never that moment where you're like, hey, go ahead and stand right in front of me and start just picking me apart. It was no, come out right away, get in your grill, make you step backwards because you're worried about the takedown. He was. I wasn't. I knew he didn't have shit on the ground. And so I just was like, okay, I'm going to come out there, throw big shots, go right into the takedown, press him to the fence, lock, drop down on the single or the double, lock the hands, lift. And, there was a couple moments there. I think I tried to throw a jumping triangle or flying triangle. And
you didn't care.
Didn't get it.
You didn't care.
Yeah. I just knew that. I knew that I could take the fight anywhere. Because I knew if I tried to jump guard or if I tried to do a flying triangle, he wasn't going to follow me to the ground. He doesn't want to be in my guard. So he did follow me to the ground when I jumped the flying triangle, and he landed some good shots from the top. But he also helped me because he gave so much space. He let me get back up to my feet because he didn't want to be down there for too long. And so there was just a lot of things that I knew, like when you're well-rounded at that time, being a well-rounded fighter was very few far between. You were either like a good grappler, you were a good striker, but you weren't really that good at both. And you sure the hell weren't a good wrestler if you were a good grappler or a striker. So it's like, it kind of came in like you knew where you could excel. I knew I had good wrestling. It wasn't the best, but I had good wrestling. I knew I had good kickboxing, but it wasn't the best, but it was still good. And I knew my jiu-jitsu game was probably some of the best in the game in terms of MMA, not jiu-jitsu itself, but just in terms of MMA jiu-jitsu. It wasn't the best, but it was good. But meshing all three things together is what made me a good fighter. Like I felt like a GSP. Honestly, I was like one of the younger versions of a GSP where I wasn't great at anything, but I was good at everything. You know what I mean? Like GSP was a good wrestler, but he wasn't a great wrestler. But he was taking down like all Americans, like Josh Koscheck, taking out all these other guys, Matt Hughes. Then he wasn't a good striker. He got knocked out by Matt Serra, but he was a good striker. He was good enough to like piece you up. Look what he did to Matt Hughes. I mean, like the things that he was able to do is because he was well-rounded. That's why he wasn't the best all the way around. He was just good at everything. And he knew how to exploit. And that was one of the things that I felt like I was good at is I knew how to exploit people's weaknesses. If you were a striker, I would wrestle you and submit you. And if you were a wrestler if you're a wrestler and a submission guy, I'd sprawl and brawl and keep it on the feet. And those are the benefits you have, of being well-rounded. So the sport's come a long way. These younger fighters are now getting well-rounded and they're becoming really good on the feet and on the ground.
Miguel, Chris, if you guys were to watch this fight, the one thing, you're leading with your punches. Like you're so far forward with no fear, but when it's all high-end stuff, but at the end of the third round, he's not even breathing hard. Yeah. It's like the cardio was, I'm like, oh my God, he's not even huffing and puffing.
Yeah, what you have to remember is this. I got signed after the Kid Yamamoto fight to the UFC. Then I went away to jail. And then I came back and I needed money because I got hit with a $30,000 fine. I just got out of jail for 6 months. Bob Cook was paying my rent, my portion of the rent because I was in jail. And so then I felt like I owed him money because he'd been doing so much for me. And so then what I did was I reached out to the UFC and said, hey, the WFA is willing to let me fight. You know, like they said, they want me to fight Rob McCullough. And then Joe Silva said, you take that fight. We're okay with you taking the fight because, you know, you need to get a fight in to make money. And then their next 2 shows were booked up. Because you remember during that time, there was only about seven or 8 UFCs a year. There wasn't like a lot. And so at that time, he's like, if you lose though, he's like, we cut your contract. And so I had a lot to prove, man. Yeah, if you lose that fight, if you lost outside the UFC, then you couldn't be considered one of the best fighters anymore. And so that was kind of the position. That's the position I was in. So I had to take the fight. But I made
John Lewis. John Lewis was the promoter.
Yeah, John Lewis was the promoter. John Huntington, who I'm still really good friends with. John Huntington is a great guy. He was kind of like one of the money guys, and John Lewis. So,
you said you made $2,000 on that. That was probably everything at the time too, wasn't it? I mean, that was
wait, no. For that fight, I made 2 and 2. I made $4,000. That was a lot of money.
Jeez, yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, no. I made $4,000 for that fight. Made 2 and 2, and then I also made that's what I made for my first UFC fight.
Yeah,
I was like, wait, they're gonna pay me what I'm gonna make in the UFC. I'm like, yeah, I'm taking that damn fight. Hell yeah, I am. So it was kind of one of those things here. After you go to jail for that amount of time and you come back, I had fought a kickboxing fight 2 weeks after I got out of jail. Hadn't been in shape. I fought for Scott Coker in a kickboxing fight when he had Strikeforce. It was only a kickboxing promotion. And I fought for him 2 weeks after, not in shape at all. He paid me. It was supposed to be an amateur fight. He paid me a little bit on the side. He's like, hey, I'll pay you this. So I take the fight. It's three 2-minute rounds. Thank God it was 3 2-minute rounds. I was fucking so exhausted after no training. I thought I could just step in. I was like, 2 minutes? I could do that all day long. The guy I fought was trying to walk me down, throw punches. It was like one of those. It really was like the fast mill wins. So embarrassing. I was so tired. Starched him, dropped him twice in the first, dropped him again in the second. But I was so tired trying to get him out of there. In the third, he just fucked me up, and I just had to hold on for dear life and not get knocked out. So, and then, but it was a reality check. I got out of jail, had that fight, realized that you couldn't just show up and fight and be that guy. Then the WFA fight was offered to me, and I gave everything I had into that training camp, every single thing, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, training my fucking ass off that whole time.
So Josh, is that when you would say you really started like doing real training camps? Because I know back in the day I would just train and fight every 3 weeks, and never really peaked at the right time until you start getting into like UFC. You said, okay, now I have to set up my time where I can peak at the right time and no fights, and then 6 weeks out I do this. Is that really when you started doing like a real camp, you think, or was it before?
Yeah, that was pretty much just that fight. The WFA was my first real camp. It was that I ran every morning. I ran 3 days a week, long distance, and then 3 days a week I ran sprints to the track. I set up a morning routine, did it early, normally around 5:30 or 6:30, depending on when the fight was. Yeah, I did it early, went back home, eat, shower, and slept. And then I basically go back to training at noon. Got done with that at 2, eat, shower, sleep, went back to training at 5:30. It was a full-time camp, did the bike workout, did the mitts at night with my coaches, did a little bit of sparring with the kickboxing team, just played around with some of the smaller kickboxers. They were really good on our amateur team or on our pro team as well, and kickboxers, and so we just had fun, man. I was a gym rat. I loved being at the gym. I also knew that being at the gym was one of the ways to make sure you weren't spending money. And I didn't have money at the time. So where are you going to be? You got to be at the gym. Be at the gym because the gym was free because I was a fighter in the UFC. So the gym was free. And I was there as much as I possibly could be there because I knew at 10 o'clock at night I had to go home and sit in a house that I was like, damn, all the realities came in. I got to pay rent. I got to pay the electrical bill. I got to pay this, got to pay that. Like, fuck. So you just start thinking about other things. When you're in the gym, you don't think about shit other than training.
So where were your parents at this point in your life in regards to their opinion of what you were doing?
What year was this? 2001, 2002.
2002.
My dad was still up in Idaho, living off the land kind of thing. My dad owned a bunch of acreage out there, and he built a little house out there, and he just was a mountain man. He just wanted to live up in the hills and in the middle of nowhere. And I think he had a neighbor kind of quarter mile away, and then his next neighbor, he had 2 neighbors about a quarter mile away, and then after that there wasn't a neighbor for like a mile. Like he just
what were they saying about your choice of profession?
Well, the Victor Estrada fight, the Victor Estrada fight, there was another one I had up there that was real good. There was another fight I had up in the Worley Casino up there, and those fights he always came to watch. You know, he lived in that area, so it wasn't that far. He would come and watch, and he loved it. My dad was one of those guys. You know, he loved it. He loved watching me fight. He thought it was amazing, man. So he was always a big supporter of mine, and cool. Just said, hey, just do what you want to do. My mom, on the other hand, was like, oh, what are you doing? And her whole family, they're all, you know, on that side of the family, they're all Mexican. They're all like, get a union job, get benefits, do this, do that. You know, they all want to work, you know, they're all plumbers, all electricians, you know, all that shit. I'm like, hey, this is not for me. I don't want to crawl underneath people's fucking houses for the rest of my life. You know, so I didn't do that. I got into fighting, and, you know, and it just kind of was that way. And, you know, they were supportive later on. Once they started seeing me on TV, they realized, okay, you are good. You know, like I never really talked about it because I didn't want to get into debates about, oh, you got to go to college. You got to be a union guy. You got to work for the city. Like, I don't want to hear that shit. So.
Si se puedes. Si se puedes. So let's talk about your UFC debut, September 26, 2003, UFC 44 against Gerald Strevens. How did that fight come about?
You know, I was scheduled to fight a couple times before that. I was supposed to fight at UFC 37.5 against Jao Perini. And I was supposed to fight Matt Serra also, and that fight fell through as well. There was another fight I think they had me scheduled to fight as well, and that fight fell through. I think there's 2 or 3 times that I was supposed to fight. The UFC 37.5, I was a week away from fighting Jao Perini. And Frank Shamrock decided to spear elbow me in the spine, my last sparring session. Like, I got caught up in the ropes, and he basically took his elbow and just speared me right in the spine and activated my sciatica. And fucking, I couldn't sit down or walk for 3 days. Yeah. So I go to therapy.
I'm not sure if you realize this, but from all your talks about Frank Shamrock, he doesn't like you very much.
No. Bro,
he didn't like me at all, man.
He didn't like me at all. He hated the fact that Bob Cook liked me so much and wanted me to be like one of their guys. He hated it. He just was like, oh no, he's not this, he's not that, and it just wasn't so. So
why didn't he leave AKA?
Why did he leave AKA?
Yeah.
Like he wanted to own part of the gym, and he actually wanted to. When he got done fighting, he wanted to be the manager for all the fighters. And none of the fighters, after what he did to me and what he did to other fighters, trusted him anymore. They're like, look, I'm not going to go with you. I'm not going to have you promote me and be my manager. When guys like Jossh had a great knockout in Arizona and you stiffed him over $500, like they're like, no, I can't, you can't be trusted. And so that was the problem. And look, no matter how you feel about, like, I like hanging out with Frank. Frank is good as like a person to hang out with, have a beer with, have a conversation with. You know, those kind of things. I can do that. But to do business with him, I couldn't do business with him. That was just me. Some guys decided to do it. I didn't.
Hey, I bet they pay. Here's the thing I can never understand about something like that. It's like, you know, when you rip me off, I had somebody rip me off for $150 on my second fight ever. I'm like, I'm never fighting for you again. You know what I mean? Like, you cost yourself so much for $150. You know, what did Frank cost himself for $500? You know what I mean? He might have cost all the relationship with those people. And I don't understand that mentality. You know, this is going to come back around at some point, but whatever.
Yeah. That was always my biggest thing. Like, is our relationship only worth $500?
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense at all. So it is what it is, man.
Let's bring it back to Gerald Strevens. You didn't appear to have any UFC jitters whatsoever.
Nah, I think with him, here's the thing with him. He had beat one of my friends, Rich Cronkleton, in a jiu-jitsu match down in Eddie Bravo's like jiu-jitsu tournament down in LA, probably about a month or 2 before I was slated to fight him. And Joe Silva called me up and goes, hey, I'm gonna have you fight this guy named Gerald Strevens. You owe me. And I'm like, what do you mean I owe you? He's like, you should walk through this guy. And he's like, you don't walk through this guy? He's like, I want to get him to shut up. Because apparently Joe was one of those guys where he didn't like when coaches had influence with Dana. He wanted to be the matchmaker because that was his job. Well, Eddie Bravo had some influence with Dana White. And so Eddie Bravo got Gerald Strevens in the UFC. And
Bangkok ready.
Yeah, Bangkok ready. And so he And so it was kind of like a weird thing. Joe's like, he's like, yeah, he's like, you owe me, man. He's like, I want you to beat this guy. He's like, you need to beat this guy. He's like, and I said, okay. So that was kind of the conversation. That's how that fight came about. I knew he was a good jiu-jitsu guy. I knew he had good rubber guard. And it just so happened, luckily for me, a month before that fight, Dave Camarillo had left Half Gracie's gym and came to AKA and became our jiu-jitsu coach there at AKA. And Dave Camarillo, he had a decent rubber guard. He didn't like to play it, but he was super flexible, really good attacks. Like, I had never trained or grappled with a guy like Dave Camarillo ever. He was so damn fucking good. And so when I grappled with him and got on the mat with him, he was just tearing me up. I had trained with BJ Penn. BJ Penn was a little bit different, like stronger, more controlling. Like, you couldn't move on BJ. With Dave, it was like he'd let you move, but let you move right into his attack where he'd just fucking take your arm or take your neck or take whatever. He was that guy. And so it was, they were different games, but both of them were phenomenal. And so with Dave just, he helped get me ready for that fight, you know, and it wasn't enough time, like, to where would have been 100% ready. But in terms of, I knew that Bangkok Ready wasn't ready for stand-up. So even though he came out in the whole Muay Thai gear stuff, I wasn't fooled, man. I was like, okay, we're going to see. You're going to stand. Let's go. It's no big deal to me. You know, this mind game shit doesn't work. So I just fought. You remember, I just fought Rob McCullough, who I knew was a way better kickboxer than this guy.
Oh, yeah.
And so, but like, I had no concerns. I had no concerns in terms of I jump into his guard, land big shots, try to back out, jump back into his guard. You know, as long as you're throwing heavy shots, I knew you could make a brown belt or a black belt turn into a white belt real quick. And so, you know, and that's it. And the proof was this, though. I trained with Dave Camarillo. As soon as I started punching Dave, he wasn't a black belt anymore. You know, so when it was just grappling, he wasn't a black belt anymore. As he trained more and more with me, he got way better at taking shots and still attacking. So there was a difference there. Like, he had some previous, like, you know, training experiences. I think he had like 1 or 2 MMA fights before he came to us, but he was like super fast, super good jiu-jitsu, you know, so he just took people down and just mauled them. But when it came to the striking aspect of it, like, he turned into, I wouldn't say a white belt, but he became like a purple belt level, which I was okay with. I could handle purple belt level, you know, when you're throwing big shots. And so with Gerald Streetman, I knew I just had to keep throwing big shots. If I was able to do that, I knew that he'd turn into a white belt or a blue belt real quick.
At the end, you had mentioned, well, you ended with, you have real awkward striking. Like, if you see angles behind your back, you know, to kind of crack somebody, and you hit him with a back fist that had a real loud noise, but you had mentioned that you did not think it landed flush.
Yeah. I didn't think it did. And he stood up. He was a little wobbled. I don't know how much of that it was that he just wanted to get out of there, or if it really did affect him. But I don't know. I mean, like, everyone, you know, Chael Sonnen just did a show talking about that fight, and he's like, it was like the punch it was the mystery punch. It's the punch that didn't land, because it didn't sound like it. It sounded like it landed, but I didn't feel anything. I thought it missed.
I think the shoulder was probably the sound. You know, for people at home to kind of like set the table properly, Gerald comes out on fire in the first minute, and he goes from submission to submission to submission to submission, where it is like, oh my God, like he keeps setting things up. And Josh, you back out, and then rather than make him stand up, you go, no. You go right back in. And it shocked me. Like, it could have been a fatal mistake for an entry-level UFC guy, but it didn't seem to bother you at all.
No, like, there was one time where, had he not been so concerned about me just doing these little, like, hammer fists to his face, he could have probably got the armbar, because I was postured over him, but his legs weren't pinched closed. And I remember this. He had his feet locked over my neck, like over my face and my neck, but he didn't squeeze his knees. All he had to do was squeeze his knees and like basically straighten out his legs a little bit. He probably would have got it, because I was dangling in there for a good 2 or 3 seconds, but I was just hammer fisting him to try and get my arm free. And just because I was hammer fisting him, he like I said, he turned into a blue belt real quick. He just wasn't able to finish the move. And once I pulled out on that, I was like, okay, he's done. He can't handle strikes and do his submission attacks at the same time. He's not a multitasker, you know, in terms of that level of jiu-jitsu. And so I just kept jumping in. He kept trying to go leg locks and all those things. And I was like, You know, like at the time, Bob Cook was one of the best guys that I ever knew about leg locks, because Frank Shamrock and Bob and those guys, they were doing leg locks like fucking crazy at the time. It was like heel hooks, inverted heel hooks, you know, just Achilles locks. They were doing it all. Toe holds was like a big deal to them. So I wasn't too concerned about the leg lock position, you know, so at the time, and it worked out for me.
Yeah, and you know, it was crazy, but you know, Chris has talked on the show about the post fight. A lot of times you don't even know what you're saying because your adrenaline is so high. You were very articulate, and you even Eddie Bravo was the person with doing a post fight. You're like, well, you know, I know he's a student with you. You gave him props. It had to have been real difficult for Eddie to interview somebody that he coached for the fight.
Yeah, I think what the problem was, I mean, honestly, I think what the problem was I kind of always regretted that post-fight interview. I should have said more in terms of not talk bad, but like more of a hype. I think I was too respectful, and those type of things kind of turned Dana and Joe and those guys off. You know, because after that fight, I didn't get as much love as I should have got. You know, they loved me in terms of like, they loved the aggression, they loved the fight, all that stuff. But then like my next fight, when I fought Hermes Franca, he had just beat one of my buddies, Rich Crunkleton, who trains with me, and he had tore his arm basically fucking all the way off, tore his elbow and everything. And so I told Dana in the cage, I said, I want that fucking fight next. I said, give me that fight next. And it took him a while. It took him like fucking 5 or 6 months to even offer me the fight. I'm like, what are you waiting on? Like, I beat Gerald. This guy beat my teammate. There's a storyline there. You know, we ended up the fight of the night that night. You know, Hermes and I. It was one of the best fights, and it was so good that they replayed it at UFC 47, because we fought at UFC 46. They ended up replaying it in house at UFC 47 because it was such a good fight. I mean, the fucking crowd went nuts because I was piecing them up and tearing them apart on the ground, and on the feet, everywhere the first 2 rounds. And then he dropped me in he dropped me in the beginning of the third. He beat the shit out of me for about 3 minutes. I got my ass kicked, man. It was so bad. There was a couple times that the ref almost stopped the fight, Larry Landless, and he almost stopped the fight. And yeah, but I mean, if I would have said like in that round, it could have potentially have been a 10-8 round. So in the new scoring, I might have been a draw. That's how crazy the fight was. But I tell people this all the time. That was the fight that opened my eyes to me. I always wanted to know if I was a real fighter. Was I a quitter, or was I somebody that like I was always a guy that I felt like I was always having the advantage in every fight that I had up until then. The Victor Estrada fight, I had to dig deep. Yeah, sure. But I was never like in a lot of trouble. I was just tired. I knew he kept coming. I was like, he was starting to break me mentally. I was like, fuck, this guy keeps going, you know, and I was getting exhausted. But this fight is where I got rocked. I got dropped. Like, I was getting beat on for about 2.5 to 3 minutes. There was like a minute left in the round. I was able to actually get back to my feet, and I finished the round harder than him. He was so exhausted from punching himself out on my face. And so it was one of those fights where I wanted to know, was I only good when I was a bully or when I was in the lead, or was I really a fighter? And to grit down and get through it and all those things, it was that was the fight that let me know that I was real.
You know, Josh, I talk about it a lot. I said a lot of guys are really good at being the hammer, but they're not very good at being the nail. You know what I mean? Yeah. So a great fighter's got to be good at both. I mean, there's so many guys. I mean, Brock Lesnar, for example, great hammer, terrible nail. You know, you fight, you punch him in the face, he's done. You know what I mean? Yeah. So you don't really know until you know. And my favorite guys are obviously good at both. You know what I mean? You can't be just a nail, though. I've seen guys just take a beating. That's horrible to watch. But I mean, yeah, man, I love a good back and forth fight. And that was one you showed. What were you saying, Mike?
Yeah, at the end of the second round, Chris, you and I have talked about this in the past.
Yeah.
Hermes Franca, he's kind of easy to predict when he gets tired. So the last 20 seconds of the second round, Chris, he hits his cardio wall. What do we always say about Hermes when he gets tired?
Oh, he's coming out guns a-blazing. He's ducking his head down, biting down his mouthpiece, and throwing hard punches. You know, I mean,
only hard punches.
They get looping, but he's throwing bombs. And he's throwing all fastballs. When he gets tired, you know what's coming. But I mean, you get hit with one of them, you're hurt, and that's what happened to you. You got hit with one, and he's coming out hard.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think I caught his leg kick, and he hit me on one foot. and fucking dropped me. I was like, this son of a bitch. I was still awake, and my face, I could see my face. Like, I couldn't put my hands up to block my face, but I could see my face getting closer to the canvas. And then I hit the canvas, and I woke up and I started scrambling around. But I mean, he dropped me, and I started going. I went down. I was like, I can see the canvas getting close. I can't put my hands up, and my face hit the canvas. And I was like, okay, boom. I got back there. I was like, okay, I'm ready to go. So it was one of those moments.
Yeah, it showed your grit, man. Like it showed you were legit. And what the UFC did after that is that was January, August 21st, 2004, UFC 49. They put you with Yves Edwards, but there isn't a title attached to that fight, which should have been kind of a heads up for everybody. So would you mind walking us through that?
Yeah, it was one of the most disappointing moments kind of in my career, because I was the number one guy in the world at the time in the rankings, not just the UFC rankings, but all across the websites. I was the number one guy in the world at lightweight, and Yves was number two. And so I was kind of upset at the fact that it wasn't for the UFC title. It was supposed to be. And then on top of that, they really didn't even have us high up in the prelims. I don't think we were the last fight on the prelims. I think we were one of the first fights of the night. Crazy. Yeah, and so there was no one really in the arena. It was a shitty situation, and I kind of was already hinting at this sucks, So I was already bailed out. They were telling us that this probably was going to be the last fight in the lightweight division for a while. And so I was like, you knew that. I pretty much knew it. Yeah, I pretty much knew it. So yeah, because there was no one really left for us to fight. They hadn't fought guys like Matt Serra and BJ was in limbo. Matt Serra was, I think, talking about 170 or was back up at 170. There was fights that just weren't making sense. Dean was pretty much done. Dean Thomas, Karl Uno had been starched a couple times. It was just he got knocked out by Hermes. It was there was no true cut who's the best guys at 155 other than me and Yves and Hermes. We were the top three guys. And so at the time, once I knew that was going to happen, I went out there trying to showboat, trying to show off, trying to show them that hey, you got to keep us around, and this should have been for the title and all this shit. And it backfired, man. There's not a reason in the world after you go back and watch that first round. There's no way that I lost that first round. I dominated every aspect of that first round. So why, with 20 seconds left, knowing there's only 20 seconds left in the first round, knowing that I was up 10-9, just fucking turn and face him, or when he pushed off, or when I got his hands free, just do I was gonna roll through for a knee bar. That didn't happen. I was like, hey, fuck it, 20 seconds, just throw a spinning back fist. Show them what they're missing. If you catch this, it's gonna be lights out. It's gonna be done. Those type of things cost me the fight. I regret it ever since, but it's I also regret the fact that I did things that I would never have done in any other fight. Would have never have done that in any other fight, because I thought it should have been for the title, and I was trying to showcase that see, we can be exciting, see, we can do this, and I did, but unfortunately it was not in my favor.
Well, wait a minute now. When you fought Razor Rob, you were doing highlight reel stuff, and
yeah,
I mean, let's really look at the situation. You come off the fence with the spinning back fist. Yves committed to the exchange with the jumping high kick, obviously, but 95% of the UFC locker room, when you're coming off the fence kind of with an awkward spin, there's only two people that I've ever seen counter that: Mike Brown and Yves Edwards. Not a single human being in UFC history that I have seen have committed to an exchange when somebody's kind of coming awkward. They don't do it. It's just those two instances. Yeah, I don't think you were wrong.
Yeah, here's the thing though, with 20 seconds left, knowing you won the round hands down, why take the chance?
But that's what made you special. I hate to say it like that. That's what made you special. You took chances. No, that's why we paid to see the fight.
You can actually take it to another level on that. I'm knowing they were going to do away with the division. Why even go in and give your all? Half the fighters would have probably taken the fight off, and not you. You said, I'm going to try to highlight this and give it. And he played his part too. That's mindset. That's special, Josh. That's not, we call Yves the uncrowned champion. That makes you, the uncrowned.
Yeah, that's wrong. That he didn't receive a belt that night. It's absolutely wrong. And that's a compliment to yourself.
No,
I mean,
and the
we
fight
couldn't say
belongs in
that
the Hall
without
of
you.
Fame.
You guys are just trying to make me feel good. Thanks, guys.
No, I mean,
But it is
You
amazing
said-
to me that I can't believe. I mean, I was there when I fought that night. I couldn't believe they were like in the way they were trying to get rid of that weight class. Especially afterwards, they came with 145, 135. Like they realized those were some of the most exciting fights in the whole UFC. I don't understand what the thought process. I can't figure it out. I still to this day, but it was amazing to me. I mean, people always ask me if I would go down to 155. I'm like, hell no, they're talking about getting rid of the division. Why would I do that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm staying at 170. You know, I couldn't figure for the life of me why they were doing that because you guys always put on great fights.
why
here's the-
155? Why did they cut 155?
They just said that it wasn't the weight class. Basically, what it was, you got to remember, BJ Penn he went through the tournament. He lost to Jens Pulver. They thought they were going to bank on BJ.
Yeah.
Then he lost to Jens Pulver. Jens Pulver leaves, goes to another organization. BJ comes back, then has a draw with Uno in the finals, right, of the lightweight tournament to crown the new champion. Has a draw. So the whole thing's a shit show, basically. And then we come in, BJ leaves. I think he leaves and goes and does whatever, he fights, I think, in K1 or something like that. He goes somewhere else.
He
He's
did
not
his
fighting
own
anymore.
promotion for a while, that Rumble on the Rock.
Yeah,
too.
he started his own promotion, Rumble in the Rock, and then I can't remember the time frames on which he did it, but all that stuff happened, and then it's like their division was not a lot of. There wasn't a lot of 55-pounders, which is funny because you look at it now, right? One of the most stacked divisions in all of the MMA,
The
in every
world.
organization, is the lightweights.
Yeah.
And so that's the hardest part, I think, for a lot of people to swallow is like, fuck, man. But at the time, it was because people were like, the smaller guys, that's not what we thought. And so, which is crazy. He had BJ one over and continued on to be just this guy that starts people. I mean, remember, he beat Dean Thomas, knocked him out, beat Uno in 11 seconds. And then he got to the finals and just kind of shit the bed against Jens Pulver, and that kind of threw a wrench in the whole system,
It's like they punished the 55-pound division because Jen's left with the belts. Like they made everyone else suffer the consequences for his actions. That's what it appeared.
Yeah, but you gotta remember at the time though too, they were hemorrhaging money to keep the promotion going. And so what promotion, what weight classes could they keep to to headline shows that people were interested in? And it really wasn't the 155-pound weight class, no matter what we did. It didn't matter.
It makes sense a lot. I mean, like you were talking about, I felt like an ass later on. I'm asking for more money. Come to find out they're 44 million in debt. Like, yeah. And that's, they only put on 6 or 8 fights a year because there just wasn't that many fights. It was tough to make money and they had to get rid of something. I get it. They didn't want as many titles because that costs more.
Yeah. Yves Edwards.
More titles.
But these guys, the problem though is these guys. I mean, Josh, what were you making for that fight? 4-4 or something like that?
No, I was supposed to make 16, 8-8.
Okay, still, I mean,
that was garbage.
Let's be a little bit realistic. That's not really a huge cost savings for them. I think it also had to do with if Jens and Monty were a handful for them, they wanted him out, and then even if BJ had won. BJ wasn't exactly that easy for them to deal with.
No.
He was a golden boy for a little while, but then BJ has his own way of thinking too. So it was getting to be high maintenance.
Oh yeah, it was. Yeah, it was.
So we had Yves Edwards on, and he said he needed to go to therapy because he never got his belt that night. It literally drove him to counseling.
Yeah. I mean, because I feel like at that time, right, we were two guys kind of in our prime. And it should have been that way. And I know for sure that if they would have kept the promotion around, I would have eventually made it back to the title and beat him. There's just no way.
Sure.
I went after him and I had fought. He got signed to fight a fight in Japan, and he needed kind of a taller kickboxing guy. And so I went out to Woodland Hills is where he was staying. Mm-hmm. I went out there and flew myself out there to help him train for a couple weeks, 2 weeks out there to help him train, put myself up, did everything to help him get ready.
Nice.
And, but I knew after the training sessions with him then, I was like, yeah, there's no doubt I would have beat you had I just keep going. It was just like, keep wrestling. He had no answer for my takedowns, had no answer for my jiu-jitsu, any of that stuff. I mean, he was good, but it wasn't like in terms of getting him on the ground and doing those things. He was one of the first fighters, people don't realize, he was one of the first fighters to start using the cage to get up. The way he used the cage, he put his back up to the fence, and he used the cage to get up. He was one of the first fighters to start really doing that really well.
Superman punch too. One of the first guys to throw a Superman punch.
No, that was me.
He did it against Joel Perini. You did it against Razor Rob. I got.
So I did it against Razor Rob. I think Joe Rogan was like in their crowd or something like that or whatever for the WFA thing. But yeah, I did it against Razor, and that was the first time Joe Rogan had said it ever been used in a high promotion in terms of MMA. And
that
then
might be.
Did he do it against João Perini?
He did it against João Perini. Yeah, and he got interviewed about it, and he didn't even have a word for it. He's just like, yeah, my training partner Carlo Prater showed me how to do it.
Got it, because I did it in my fight against Gerald Streetman.
Yes, you did.
Yeah.
Well, but pre-Streetman was Razor Rob, and you definitely did it there as well.
Yeah. But I'm saying, like, I thought I was the first guy to do it in the UFC. Because that's I think Joe gives me credit for that still, is that I was the first guy to do it in the UFC.
We gotta check the dates on that. That's a trivia question for our guy.
João Perini was 37.5 because he took my spot. He's the reason why he got it in the UFC. I'm the reason why he got in the UFC. See, I'm doing all these guys favors. They don't even realize it.
And they should thank you.
He wasn't with the UFC yet. And I got hurt. Frank Shamrock spiraled me in that fight leading up, and he got in. And then later he was my demise.
Yeah, man,
wow.
What's amazing,
he did like
when you
15 years in prison too. I mean,
Yeah.
All right, Miguel, I apologize. Go ahead.
No. Just I want to wrap up. The Yves conversation too. Is the sad part is like with Josh's confidence and the way the fight played out, including the ending and stuff. If you're a promotion, you do have a rematch there. You've got. They gave you everything to work with. Everything to work with.
Yeah, they just didn't financially. I don't think they were thinking that. They were thinking, let's try this Ultimate Fighter thing, which was like a year, 2 years later. They did the Ultimate Fighter thing in like 2005, 2006 is when they brought the lightweight division back. So it took them some time, man.
Yeah, it was a few years.
So at AKA, we had John Fitch on, and he was talking about the two strongest people that he had ever rolled with were Gray Maynard and Khabib. What is your recollection between those two?
Gray was like that hard, strong person. Like when he grabbed you, you could just feel the muscle strength. Like he's just that strength of tension strength. Khabib was maul, like bear, like he likes to say, like he like just controlled you. He would just hold you and you couldn't move. Whereas Gray would transition and just like pick you up and slam you and do these things. Whereas he didn't do it with as much technique and finesse as Khabib does. Khabib did it with a lot of technique, which is crazy because, Gray, I believe, is a 2-time All-American for Michigan State Wrestling. Phenomenal wrestler, super strong, hit like a fucking truck, nasty good, right? But yeah, Khabib has a different type of feel to him. Islam Makhachev, same thing. He's got a different type of strength to him. I feel like he's probably the strong, one of the, if not the strongest guy I've ever rolled with, is Islam.
Really?
Yeah.
Did Kazmat Chimaev, did he ever roll with you guys?
No, he's never been. I haven't seen him at AK ever.
Okay. All right. I'm done.
Now, Josh, you guys have, AK has some I'd say reputation for, man, just having some gym wars, just going out there and going hard at it. Do you think you guys had a lot of like really tough sparring sessions? And how do you feel about that? Is that a good way to do it or not? What is your thought on that now?
Well, I look at it this way. Okay. The NFL, right?
Yeah.
Originally they would do hard practices, right? Like three times a week, whatever it was. Remember they do the Oklahoma drill where they run into each other. That was the old school NFL, college drills, things like that. And people were getting concussions, not realizing they're getting minor concussions in practice and all, and then also getting a concussion in the game. They just keep going. The thing is though, is now because your brain and your head is not conditioned to take those shots, now guys just get knocked out. So they get knocked out, get carried off in a stretcher. Because your head's you're not getting used to being hit. Like you're not conditioned for that pain. Mm-hmm. Like there's no difference. Chris, you can probably attest to this. Say we don't spar hard for say like 3 or 4 weeks or a month or whatever, and we come back, get ready to jump into a camp. That first week of sparring, your forehead is it hurts. Like the skin, it hurts. You got little tiny soft tissue bruises underneath. It's painful sometimes the first couple of weeks of sparring when you come back after not sparring for a month or two. Yeah. And so the damage your body, your brain is able, not just your brain, but your forehead and everything else, skin toughens up. all of those things you've learned to adjust in taking the shot. The NFL players, they're not doing hard practices anymore. So when they get in the game and they're going full speed, they're not conditioned to take those type of shots. They're getting knocked out more. Whereas before they'd get rocked a little bit and they could keep going. So I don't know which one's worse. You know, like we sparred hard 3 days a week, but you didn't have to spar all the time. And I didn't spar all the time. I like to spar, but I would spar with guys like Paul Bonatello, Mike Kyle, Rockhold, Trevor.
Wow.
I would spar with all of them. It didn't matter. Like my speed was a big factor. I sparred a lot with Kostick and Fitch, tons, and even Mike Swick. But I mean, I sparred several times with Paul Bonatello and Mike Kyle and Trevor Prangley. You know, so I would spar with everybody. It didn't matter. You know, in their defense, they would usually bring me in on their last round, just kind of like stick and move, try and make them tired, grind them out, like knee them in the belly, those kind of things, like make them exhausted, make them work out of shitty positions, be aggressive, you know, and that type of stuff. But I don't know, man. I think there's something to be said about being able to dig down deep in live training and live sparring that got me through the Hermes Franca fight. That got me through, like I use this fight as an example, the Tony Ferguson fight. I mean, in that fight, I left a part of me in the cage, man. I wasn't the same after that fight. I knew it. I was 38 years old. I was like, okay, this isn't what it used to be anymore. My body can't take this anymore. It was kind of an eye-opening experience for me. And I think, but there was never a moment in that fight where I was like, oh, fuck, I'm going to quit. Like my body just kept going. I kept thinking, this is the chance for you to get out of this fight. And it just kept going. My body kept moving and I just kept following along. My body was like, my body was just telling my brain, you're not going to tell me what to do. Fucking just keep going. We got this. Yeah. And it just, you know, we've been doing it for so long, Chris. We understood that, like, if you stop moving, man, you lose. Yeah. And so that was the thing, and just never stop moving. And but it was a reality check. But I think a lot of the hard sparring helped condition me for that. It's like that: get taken down, get back up, get taken down, get back up, take a big shot, dive in for the double leg, get the takedown, get on top, rest when you can. Like that hard sparring conditioned me for all the shit that I had to weather inside that cage.
Yeah. I mean, do you remember getting a lot of concussions or anything like that?
Nah, I didn't get any until the end of my career. I got dropped by this kid named, we called him Macajon. I don't know his name. I didn't know his real name. We just call him Macajon's, like spaghetti, I think, in Portuguese. So we called him spaghetti. I don't know what the fuck. I don't know how it came about, but we called him Macajon. I came back from I think it was like from after the Tony Ferguson fight. I came back, and I had taken like 2 months off and just not did anything. Came back and sparred. My first sparring session was with him. He had a fight lined up in like 2 weeks. And I went in there to give him some rounds. Hav asked me, can you give him some rounds? I'm like, yeah, sure. But he threw a spinning back kick, like a wheel kick or whatever, and he fucking hit me right in the temple. Didn't see it coming. Just fucking, I saw it coming, but I thought I got out of the way, but apparently I didn't. Next thing you know, I'm like sitting up going, fuck, I just got dropped. You know what I mean? Like it was one of those situations like, fuck. And then I finished the round sparring, which I shouldn't have done. And then after that, I wasn't the same, man. And then like probably about 3 weeks later, I sparred again with Aaron Pico. And then he dropped me too, a young kid, good wrestler. You know, he dropped me as well. And I'd never been dropped in training or sparring ever. I got hit by Kyle, Paul Bonatello, Kostick fucking rocked me hard a couple times, never got dropped. And now here I am getting dropped by a guy who's 155 pounds. And I'm like, something's not right. So I took about 4 months off and just let my brain heal. But I never was the same. After the Tony Ferguson fight, I never was the same, man. I was 38, just couldn't take the shots like I used to be. It just wasn't, it was time. It was time for me to escape. Yeah. You know, take these next couple fights, see how you feel. I got a couple wins, you know, and then even my last fight when I fought Patricky, I got headbutted and that dropped me in the fight. And it's just like, it wasn't the same, man. Like I could take those headbutts in training. I could take those headbutts in fights before. Now all of a sudden I'm getting shot to my butt, you know, off of like small head clashes. It's not the same.
Now,
so
Josh,
I knew it was time to go.
Now, Josh, you seem like, I always talk to people about this. So like, man, when you're in there, you have to come up with an exit strategy. I hate seeing guys who are 45 and they're still fighting. I'm like, man, what are you doing? You know, like, I mean, playing your work, and you've obviously done that because you've transitioned very well. You speak well. You do the commentary and everything. And was that kind of, did you know that towards the end, like after these Ferguson fights, did you know I want to transition to something else? Had you always had that plan, Was this something you came up with afterwards? Like, I got to do something else. How did that come out about? And you recommend, like, I always talk to people, I'm like, man, as you're fighting, you better figure out what you want to do next, because I don't want to see you fight when you're 45.
Yeah. Well, see, here's the thing. With me, I had opened up a gym, probably one of the biggest mistakes of my life. I'd opened up a gym right when I was fighting Benson Henderson. So had I beat Benson Henderson, I was opening my gym 3 weeks before that. So I opened my gym December 26th or 7th or whatever, right before New Year, so I could use all that money I spent as a write-off on the next year's taxes. So I had to open it right before that gym. I fought Benson, I think like January 19th or something like that in Chicago. So I was getting ready. I didn't even have coaches and people to run my classes and everything like that. I was struggling to find people to like help teach the classes while I was in my fight camp, while I was trying to open the gym, while I was doing all this other shit. Anyways, I ended up coming up short on the Benson fight, which I still believe I won, but it is what it is. But then in that scenario, I knew that I knew that I had the potential to do TV only based off because Fox kept asking to use me and Dana White kept shutting it down.
Really?
And I'd heard that from all the inside people that worked for Fox. And I also heard it from people that were also broadcasters during that time. And so I had heard that some of the broadcasters that were working for Fox, or not, they were working for Fox, but they were fighters for the UFC. They had said, yeah, we keep saying, hey, call Jossh. Jossh would be good at this. And Dana, and they said, we tried, man. Let's keep shutting it down. And so I just knew that I was like, look, I know there's interest in having me to do it. But then it wasn't meant to be. So once I knew that I wasn't in Dana's plans, like in terms of a future, and that was right after the Nate fight, right before the Benson fight, they were calling to ask, about me fighting him, and so about me doing the commentary for Fox. And once I knew that I wasn't in Dana's plans, I'm like, here, I just knocked out the guy who just fought for the title, and Nate Diaz. And then I'm supposed to be I'm fighting Benson Henderson, who was your most current champion for the longest period of time. And I'm not getting any love. You're not putting me on Fox. So I just knew. I was like, all right, there's no interest in having me be their champion. There's no interest in having me be your marketable, marketing me. Because I also knew I was 36 years old. And so I knew that they're like, look, we're not trying to build 36-year-olds.
Oh.
And so I just said, okay, look, whatever. So after I ran through my contract, I went over to the Bellator, made some money there. They gave me a great deal. I got paid a lot of money to fight for them. And I had already worked with Scott Coker for years, at Strikeforce as my promoter. And I had also fought kickboxing fights for him. I think I had 4 kickboxing fights for him as well when the Strikeforce was just a kickboxing promotion. And so I had a relationship with him. And as I started to get towards the end of my career, they said, hey, after my first fight with them and I got to finish, they said, would you like to try and do, some commentary? I was like, absolutely. So they kept using me periodically, through this stuff. And once they finally pulled me in for a full audition after my second fight, they said, we want to audition you for a full, to be full time and, and seat. So I went down to LA and auditioned there at the Viacom studios. And they called me back. They're like, hey, you did a good job. We just got to work on a couple of things. You got to slow down. You got to do this, got to do that. I was like, all right, cool. And so then, they used me another like 4 or 5 more times, and they saw that I was getting better and I was focusing on trying to get better. And I had more fights left on my contract. And so then I fought Patricky, and then they said after the Patricky fight, I lost. They got headbutted and they got robbed and knocked out, whatever it was. I said, look, this is probably just not going to last. I had 2 or 3 more fights left on my contract. And I was thinking to myself, yeah, I just don't know if I want to fight anymore, And so they said, hey, like, would you be interested in a long-term deal? And I was like, they said, but you probably would have to stop fighting. I said, I'm done fighting. If you guys offer me a long-term deal, I'm done fighting. They offered me a long-term deal. And I announced my retirement once I got a long-term contract.
Good for you, man. I love seeing that. That's how the way it should be. I hate it when people keep fighting. You do great at what you do, and if you kept fighting, maybe you wouldn't do so great. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was a blessing though, because I started doing the commentary, and I became good friends with John McCarthy, and we started doing our podcast. Podcast is doing well, making money, and the same thing with being an analyst. That's making money now, and so I'm doing well, man. My gyms, even though we're in California and it's struggling right now, but like I'm breaking even. It's not costing me money, and that's all that matters to me. As long as the gym is not costing me money, I love the people that I have here. I love the community that we've built here, and we've had it for about 9 years now. 8 years, 9 years. And so it's just, it's just kind of that. It's like a place I call home. I come here and just vent out, get to grapple with my students. I get to lift weights with my students. I get to do my HIIT workouts and my, I get my kickboxing in a little bit and do some light contact, whatever it is. And it's just fun, man. We get into it. We have a good time.
So I know we're winding up here. I'm going to, if you don't mind, just one more out of me. Have you looked at psilocybin in order to strengthen
I've been microdosing for years.
Do you like it?
I absolutely love it. Awesome. What I do is I do it in stages. I'll do 3 months at a time. Every 4 to 6 days, I'll do one microdose of psilocybin, and then I'll wait another 4 to 6 days. You can start to tell when it starts to wear off, and I'll do it for say 3 months, and then I'll take about 3 months to 4 months off, and I notice I don't need it anymore. And then I come back when I start feeling like I'm getting a little bit more forgetful and I'm feeling those things. I'll jump back on it for about 3 months. And then, I do it in phases. I do it in phases, man. And so, but yeah, it's been a godsend. I never got into like Adderall or any of that other shit. Like I was never someone that I don't take ibuprofen. I don't take Advil. I don't take any of that shit. So when you get into my body as a temple type stuff, like I was a little concerned, but then I realized once I took it the first couple of times, like, wow, I'm motivated. I'm focused. I'm actually I can focus on what I need to get done for the day. There's no outside distractions. I can get my things going. And also like training wise, I feel motivated to train, like grapple and to learn new techniques and work on new techniques. And it's just a different mindset, for 4 to 6 days, you feel clarity. And so, and there's no effects. Like people think like, oh, if you're going to microdose, you're going to see like visuals, you're not going to be able to drive. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works, buddy. So,
but what if we like the visuals?
Yeah, but then you gotta add a little more in the microdose, bud.
Josh, it's been a great interview. I love talking about the early stuff, and you reminded me about how robust really that Northwest scene was with talk about Dennis Hallman and stuff. Now, maybe you weren't out there, but since Trevor's your friend, I remember Trevor got caught in one of those early show up and you're going to fight that guy over there. And it turned out to be a guy named Dennis Kang. Were you at that one? Did you catch that fight?
Yes, I was at that. I wasn't at that fight. That was actually in Canada. I think it was in Victoria.
Okay.
Was it in Victoria out there? I think, but it was in Canada. Show up. They knew, like I said, you couldn't do research on the guys. Yeah, he showed up and fought him. I'm trying to remember how that fight went down. If Trevor won that fight or if he lost that fight.
I think he won it.
Yeah.
Because it took Kang a little while to get warmed up in MMA too.
Yeah, but I think Trevor did beat him. But yeah, it was one of those like tough fights. That was kind of like the eye-opening experience of him coming down to train with me at AKA. Is like he realized, hey, I could do something with this. So the rest has been pretty fucking good for him.
Yeah,
we're done.
Hey man, I really appreciate all your time. Great answers, and just giving us stuff from such a long time ago, man. I love those early stories. Like I said, we're doing this because if we don't do this stuff, man, this stuff's going to be lost and forgotten. Nobody talks about this. They're talking about UFC, Bellator. I want to hear the old shit. So thank you for telling everybody that, and people will know it from now on. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just real quick, make sure you guys go to Weighing In, check out my podcast there. It's on
awesome.
YouTube, all the audio platforms. I do it with Big John McCarthy. We have fun. We also have a trusty little sidekick we call Podcast Dave, who's our producer. He's just fun. We like to rag on him. It's always a good time. So there's that. And then, when we started off this interview tonight, you said, it's probably about an hour. Well, 2.5 hours later, my friend.
Well, that was a game plan, I promise. We can't help it, man.
We had Shay.
It's been fun, man. It's been fun. I felt like when I was on the Rogan show. Oh, whoops. I felt like when I was on the. Hello?
Yeah.
You're here. We hear you. You still there?
He just did what Chael did. Chael hung up on us. That's what he did.
No, he's still there. He shut off his camera. Hold on. Let me see if I can ask him to start the video again.
You're back on.
Hey, dude, he took the Chael Sonnen way out. That's it.
Okay. That's okay. That's okay.
Hey, we got a good one. It's all right.
No, he's an awesome guy. Like, hey, from the early days, the Punk, the thing, the career, he still has the charisma, man. He's like him and Chris, just like talking fights and stuff like that. Me and Mike should have just turned our cameras off, man.
Yeah, I agree.
No, it's perfect, man. It was good stuff. I enjoyed it, but
let's get out of here.
All right, you guys. Let's see it. Thank you, man. That was great. I knew that was going to be a good one. Knowing Jossh, just this guy's a commentator. You give him just Anthony, he'll get going, man. You just tell him, get him pointed in a direction. He'll go in detail, which is what we want. Some guys don't give that great an interview. He did great, man. But just talking so much, truth about how things affected him. I thought it was really telling. I mean, you could tell that, that biggest fight, where he was fighting basically for the title versus Yves Edwards. I mean, you can tell that still bothers him to this day.
It hurt him.
Very honest.
Yeah. So Miguel, I borrowed one of your old friends to help with gathering of information with Anthony Hamlet. Anthony was real good. When we talked about Victor Estrada, there's no video available on that fight at all in existence. And only somebody at that event would know that he gave Dennis Hallman the double birds at the end. Mm-hmm. And, when that came forward, we also got a really good Frank Shamrock story out of it. So, I mean, but that's what it does. Like Crowbar and Anthony Hamlet really helped us out with information on top of like the video and online research that we did. I thought it was real solid, man. I thought we got a lot of good stuff out of him. What do you think, Miguel?
Well, to do a little plugging too, Keith Mills sent me some pretty exclusive Jossh Thomson picks from his library that we can use, and one of them is him pointing at the shirt he's wearing that says "Frank Glamrock is my bitch." So him and the Frank story, we got a picture for it and stuff. So we're starting to come together with some ideas. We'll see what we can do with it. But Jossh gave us a lot of material. That's my hat's off to him. I knew he was, he was charismatic and stuff like that, but he came with full guns blazing and gave us over 2 hours.
So Miguel, what was your opinion of how he talked about the Yves Edwards fight? Like it still bothers him. You could see it.
Yeah, we recently did an Yves Edwards interview and we got Yves' thoughts, and to Yves' credit, thanks, Mike. And to his credit, when he corrected me too much, I used to call him Yves, so be careful. But the point is to Yves, his credit, he was just as honest as Jossh Thomson was in his telling of that story. And I thought about the idea of bringing them together, but then I thought maybe it's not a good idea because both of them, they didn't lose any of that. Yeah, they didn't lose any of that competitiveness, I know that from interviewing them in the recent past. Those guys, are still going to be competitive. Jossh certainly said, hey, I trained with him afterwards and I know I'd have been okay. That's drawing a line in the sand in my book. And no one knows that better than the Punk. You know what I mean? So he knows what he's saying. Yeah,
Chris, if you look at Yves and he said, well, Yves, what was your motivation for the fight? He goes, for any of his fights, that guy, he signed a contract to fight me.
Yeah.
Which means he thinks he can beat me. Like if that's your level of commit, like that's all you need to commit, like to really want to hurt somebody in a fight. There's very little move in regards to trying to figure out, just a peaceful resolve in regards to the situation. So fun. So anyway, guys, if you're this far into this video or the audio, you got to like, share, subscribe. We have some people
comment.
Oh, please. It helps us with the algorithms.
We actually respond.
Yes.
Yeah, watch the answer.
and we're hitting the areas where we're getting close to monetization, and the only way we can do that is with your help. Like, we're not asking for any money. We just need your help. Like, if you guys got information, please send it to our social media. Any little inside stories or stuff like that for future interviews, we'll take all of it. Please send it to us.
And for part 2 of the Jossh Thomson interview that hopefully we'll get down the line, I got a couple of people, not Trevor Prangley, but I got a couple of people in the area that I'm going to activate and get some stories out of that he has no idea I know.
That's good.
So with so much said, hope you enjoyed it. And next Friday, we got another big one for you. So we're not telling you who it is. You're just going to have to tune in.
Check out the full interview on iTunes, Spotify, and all major podcast platforms.